Welcome back to Week in Review with one and only Doovid. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Looking forward to a great show. And I'll hand it over to Doovid for the introductions while I get the intro song set up.
Hey, Jennifer. Good to be back. Not too much exciting this week. I did do a stream on chess, like 4 hours. Quite a bit of interesting information. I do want to talk about that, about 100 years of chess psychology and looking about how people learn and think about chess and what's the difference between different people's skill levels. What does it say about human thought that different people have different aptitude in terms of performance on the chessboard? So hopefully we'll talk about that in the relation to generally consciousness. And on my stream, I focus generally just on the psychology of chess, not my greater multiple truth hypothesis theory. I also finished reading that Christian Shade's book on free will and the multiverse, cluster mind consciousness. Pretty interesting. I actually read the book, parts of it slowly, parts of it 2 or 3 or even 4 times to get it. So that subject is not well written on, so there's not like a whole bunch of good like textbooks on the quantum mind, and I have almost all the major literature on it. I mean, there's quite a few different people from like esotericists, but in terms of like the science of consciousness, there's not a whole bunch of material written on the subject. So from that, Christian Shade's book is pretty good. So hopefully we'll look at a few charts from that, and that will put us in good view. The Science of Consciousness conference happening this week, probably a non-event in terms like there's not going to be much to talk about. Eventually they'll release the papers, and maybe they'll release the Zoom meetings on YouTube at some point, and I'll probably watch those. But I don't think there's going to be like any groundbreaking news broken in these conversations. Or people might release the direction of research, but at this point, if you're up on the field, I don't think anyone's expecting like any huge like groundbreaking research changing papers, and that's what I kind of want to show with chess, is just an example that will give you the whole bulk of information that is known for how the mind produces thought. And then the last thing I'll mention, I was on Luke Ford, I think a few times. So it's good to maintain friendly relations with Luke Ford. Luke Ford, we did talk about, he did play a clip of last week's Week in Review, and Luke Ford agreed with me. He's not interested in debates. Whether like if Jennifer had asked him as a favor to do it, he would have done it or not, I don't know. That's hypothetical, and that would be between Luke and Jennifer, not me. We did not discuss that, but it's nice to have kind of friendly relation with Luke and talk to him every once in a while. Obviously, Jennifer was on Halsey. We had the post show, so hopefully we'll analyze that in terms of streaming. The goal the push to get Jennifer to 1,000 subscribers like this week for the Science of Consciousness conference, looks like it's not going to happen, barring some miracle. Modern day debate hasn't got back to us. It's possible, like we'll discuss that, how, whether we should push for that, or whether it's a big deal, or whether, we should invite JF onto my or her channel and do a debate, or just go forward with doing the debates, me and her, or it's a worthwhile venture. But I did do some research and thought into this concept of dualism. Maybe we'll talk about the measure limit. And I also prepared some slides I found on Hinduism that, just to keep this educational, that maybe we'll go through, just to it would have been related to the debate that me and Jennifer may have on dualism, but to show the various schools of Hinduism, and where they might fall out in, what are the different schools and what are their opinions on these issues, and why would it be important, so to say, that one school of Hinduism might be dualistic and another school of Hinduism might be non-dualistic. So that might be interesting to talk about. We got Howie in the chat, so hopefully he's gonna come on and talk about his streaming and what he's doing. And
you can set it a link any time. I had to block him on Facebook, but I'm pretty trigger happy with the block button. If people keep antagonizing me, I just
so we'll discuss that in terms of some sort of decorum, and Howie, if he wants to be part of these circles, what does that entail, and so hopefully that won't be problematic and there won't be conflict. So I thought just to set the tune, I'd play a clip of a rabbi served, Rabbi Jungreis, a Nikolsburg Rebbe, a descendant of famous rabbis going back to Hungary. And this rabbi is kind of famous for being very friendly and inviting to everybody, like giving away food, and also singing. Like he's always like chanting and singing and getting people to clap and sing. And he makes up his own tunes. So he'll get a tune, and then he'll, whatever reason in his own mind, choose a certain Hebrew verse to it. And then he'll encourage people. So like, he was a relatively famous rabbi, so I was in his entourage. But like part of being in his entourage, like we sing, because New York's a busy place. There's a lot of people, and a lot of times, like the rabbi, you got to go to family cycle events, like weddings and bar mitzvahs and various things, and they're happy events, and you're supposed to like dance and sing. So the rabbi comes, and in Hasidic circles, like the rabbi is supposed to be musical, and so not only is like a rabbi scholar and officiate, but he's also like musical, and like so this rabbi, he's got his own tunes, and so he goes through a process where he makes the tune, and then he like teaches tunes to people. So maybe if Nicholas shows up, we'll talk about him selling these CDs and just kind of like the bulk of music and the cultish type thing where it's actually like a process. Like here's the tune, and here's the rabbi teaching his right hand guys the tune, and then next thing you know it, like the events, that tune's being sung, and you could almost measure the influence of the cult by the spreading of these tunes.
All right, so let's just play that.
Doin lechol hashulai, oy oy oy, ki ato himelech, ki ato himelech, doin lechol hashulai, ki ato himelech, ki ato himelech, doin lechol hashulai, oy oy oy, ki ato himelech, ki ato himelech, doin lechol hashulai, oy oy oy, ki ato Piato Mela, Udoin lechol hasholayim, again, Piato Mela, Udoin doin lechol hashulam. Oy, 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 ki atoi melech, ki atoi melech. Doin lechol hashulam. Oy, oy, ki atoi melech, ki atoi melech. Doin lechol hashulam. Ki atoi melech. Theater Melech Uni Chalashulam is the Melech Udo in Chalashulam. Every place with the Shalom, that is the Melech Udo. I'm close to the town.
All right, that wraps that up. Thanks for.
It's actually interesting there. It's probably a verse. I didn't look it up, but he's saying the mantra is Kiatu Hamelech Adonai Kol Shalom, that because you are the king, the master of all peace, and whatever that praise it means of the Almighty, and that the king is considered the master of peace. So after he chanted, he gave like this, explanation of why the king is, why you need the king to be a master of peace, or the connection in the chant. But I would say in spiritual circles, chanting like that is very common, and it serves a purpose of creating unity of purpose and function and community. You gotta like chant it out. And you see, like, even streaming, all the conflict and stuff that happens in streaming could have been chanted out. Although, you could argue that chanting doesn't always work, that you could have conflict, post chanting. But the theory of the chanting is, just theories of collective consciousness. So let me hand it over to Jennifer to give her week in review and talk about what she's been up to, and then maybe what she wants to talk about this week in review.
Yeah, I enjoyed your monologue there. It reminded me of a thread I saw on 4chan today about talking about consciousness. And it's very interesting stuff. And sorry, I had a train of thought and I just lost it, but it was a really good one. I find that that's often how it is with the best trains of thought. They just run out on you. But yeah, it was about the clocks. Because essentially what I was reminded of was that people were complaining that probability doesn't really make sense and it doesn't apply to reality. And so how can quantum systems be based on probability? But it just reminded me of what you were saying, like the conflict. The probability of the conflict decreases the more you share that chanting, because chanting is like intentionally setting your vibrational frequency to the same value. So yeah, it does work on a probabilistic sense. It's just applying the probability that allows you to go to the point where it is usable. My week was great. I did an online conference. I'm sort of not sure if I want to say what conference it was, because I don't want to bring the hordes of peace from YouTube, but it was a lot of fun to like actually catch up with professionals and see what's going on in the industry and like learn jargon and stuff. So that's why I used to do it on my old job. I had missed it a little bit, so that's mostly what I did this week, as well as I don't know if people could hear that I'm a bit stuffed up from some pollen in the air, but yeah, hopefully that's over soon. And yeah. There we go. I'm not a very exciting person. Sorry.
Well, how are you going to be a popular streamer without being exciting? So
that's what I realize, is that I don't even care about myself as much as my fans do. So it's like I can't have fans.
Yeah, I don't need fans. I mean, you have YouTube is set up in a certain way. You need followers or financial supporters or people who just watch your video, or chat culture, colleagues, associates, various levels of association. That's just a product of karma. And cultcraft of getting the ideas out there, and you could protect your private space and still be a public person at the same time. And there's methodologies and best practices to doing it. There's no safeguards, and to some extent, karma is karma. The Talmud uses the expression Talmud Chacham Reshus Rabim, that a wise man is public property. That the wisdom does not belong to you; it belongs to God. And if the wisdom has been endowed to you, it's not your possession; it's God's possession, and it's somewhat like a public property. Therefore, your masters are required to teach. It's not like a question of, oh, will the master teach me? It's like factual. The master was created to teach.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting take. I feel a bit of a sneeze coming on here, so excuse me if I.
Bless you. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID-19, and I was on Luke and I was mentioning it, and he really hadn't been following it, and it seems like there's going to be a horrible second wave, and it's probably going to be worse than the first wave. And right now, the place that's being hit the hardest is Israel, and Israel's almost up to like 5,000 cases a day. And however, Israel has one of the best healthcare treatment systems, so the death rate in Israel has been one of the lowest, but it's still hovering somewhere like maybe 0.5% or something. So, but that if there's 4,000 cases, that's going to mean at least tens of deaths a day, and they can't really agree to a lockdown. So I'm not sure if it's interesting to Jennifer to talk about the Israeli situation. They're pumping forward all these like new peace deals with Bahrain and the UAE, and the interest in like global karma. What does that mean? And but I think the coronavirus is the more key issue, and that in all likelihood that we could see a big uptick, and it'll be worse than it was the first time. And the same thing with the overflowing of the hospitals could happen. And once the medical system is, God forbid, like overtapped and medical workers start getting infected again, it could be really bad. And then looking at like elections and the political situation, if we analyze Israel and we say they just cannot get themselves together to stop the spread of COVID-19, like there's other things happening. There's protests. Netanyahu, like no one really wants this corrupt guy in charge, and everybody's locked down and they're controlling the economy on high, and everyone's just like sitting back, and it's like Netanyahu in the driver's seat, and so the Israeli public isn't so happy about that, and protesting. But then they said like there were over 60 people in those protests that were known to be infected by COVID-19, and the thousands of cases and the high holidays. People usually go to synagogue like one time a year, and that's going to be next this Friday night and Saturday. We should still be able to stream next Sunday, but it might have to wait till like 8:30 or something after sundown, because the second day of the Jewish New Year's. But Israel right now is agreeing, in theory, to enter a lockdown Friday afternoon to give people time to prepare for at least 3 weeks. And then you say like, oh no, like there's probably going to be another 25,000 people, God forbid, infected between now and Friday in Israel. And that means you could mean 200 to 500 people, maybe even 1,000 people dead if the healthcare system gets over flooded and they can't treat people as well as they're treating them now. And then the likelihood that like people are going to be, what the hell? You're starting lockdown the day before Rosh Hashanah, like the most important day, and people like, God runs the world and decides this and that. Is your average Jew going to think that like God does not want me to go to synagogue because the risk of COVID-19? And all over the sector, Israelis are saying like they're not going to let the country lock down again. They're going to be protests and everything. So I think they'll be pretty interesting, and it could be they're not going to be able to lock down, and then it's just a question. Maybe it'll be like Sweden, and Israel will have, God forbid, over the next few months, thousands of dead, and they'll be able to handle it, even tens of thousands of dead. or it could be, God forbid, that COVID-19 is going to prove to be worse than people thought, and the second wave will be more deadly than the first wave. And I mentioned that I shared Jennifer, Luke played it on a stream today, that Chinese woman who said she's a virologist, and she has evidence that it was made in the lab and it is man-made, and is going to release a paper and could even demonstrate by the genetic markers that it was man-made, and thinking that like pangolin bat, to me, God forbid, like I'm still pretty scared about coronavirus. I think the worst is coming up ahead of us. However, I'm highly skeptical that it may be a bioweapon. So it's interesting, this woman coming forward and even saying these genetic markers that everybody's saying, no, it's evolution. Like it jumped from a bat to a pangolin, back to a bat to a human. Like these things happen all the time, evolution. That actually, that is more pointing towards evidence of genetic engineering or being man-made. So that'll be interesting if they actually released that paper. So
Yeah, we had this convo a while ago. You seemed pretty sure that it was man-made, and I was pretty sure that it had originally come from a bat, but I think we kind of maybe disagreed on definition of man-made, something like that.
I've been watching a ton of stuff on COVID-19 because, like, I do really think, God forbid, that it's likely the worst is ahead of us. And, for what the multiple truth hypothesis, or if me and Jennifer did do this debate, if it does work out, like, all of a sudden she gets the email and it's like, you're on for Monday night, can you do it? I mean, maybe we will, but, talking about the measurement limit and knowledge of
you and I on your channel, I'm sure we get some super chats. I mean, last time you got spite super chats, so you'll get some.
Yeah, so I was going to mention the importance of the measurement limit, but just think, like, 6 months later, with all the best minds around the world researching the virus, and we really don't know all that much. We know quite a bit, but the reason why the amount we know is very limited is because of the measurement limit. And, so the implications to, like, Jennifer's theory of the quantum periodic table, which is, relatively far beyond the measurement limit, versus something like coronavirus, which to some extent, the virus as a whole is not beyond the measurement limit, but the important aspects of the virus are basically beyond the measurement limit.
Well, the measurement limit has to do with the amount of information. And so there's basically 14 dimensions of information. So there's like 14 ways. If we want to extract the maximum information, we'd have to be doing it right on 14 levels. And then it's like, what are the chances we're doing that? It's like, no, we've got maybe like 3 levels, but it kind of works. And the models pretty much converge because our mathematical approximation techniques are just so darn good. Like the way we could use this calculus stuff is pretty amazing. I was thinking about the Dirac delta equation this week. You know which one that is?
It sounds familiar, but no, it's not. Bringing up exactly the equation or what it's related to.
Dirac delta is like a point. It's like trying to model a point particle or the instant of quantum state collapse. So it's like a vertical line. It's like flat everywhere. It's 0 everywhere and infinity at one point. And the idea is that the integral over infinity of the Dirac delta is 1. So it's basically a way to model an infinite potential well with a finite numerical approximation. So calculus, in some sense, they're all infinite, but like we sort of circumscribe the infinity. That's the power of calculus, is the ability to work with infinities. Excuse me. Yeah, so I've got it on the screen now. It's a pretty simple looking function, but it's very useful for quantum mechanics because it's how they model the instant of observation. Because the probability of collapse is 100%. I don't know how I got on this tangent, but
well, because I was mentioning the importance of the measurement limit.
Yeah, so that's the real Thanks for mentioning that. That's the real power of it, is telling us, like, generally how many dimensions of information are available, so we can look at the information we have and we can conclude, oh yeah, there's like 5 dimensions of information or what have you, and then we can say, oh, we must be short, this number of dimensions. But it's sort of impractical to work in a 14-dimensional reality, but it's a way for us to say, well, whatever information you have, you're missing part of it, because we know the reality is this big dimension and your answer is in a much lower dimension. So I like that. It's like the multiple dimensions of truth hypothesis. Is Howie here? I don't know if Howie wanted to jump in with anything in particular.
Doovid, you were just discussing how a study showed that COVID may have been genetically engineered by humans. Is that correct?
No. I mean, God forbid. As of now, all of the official studies are 100% on the side that COVID-19 came through evolution and zoonotic transfer, which zoonotic transfer means switching from an animal to a human, most likely being a bat, although with relations to a pangolin. And the genetic evidence, which I've shown on my channel and streams with Jennifer, they use to demonstrate evolution, that the similarities between this virus is a certain percent similar to the similar virus in a bat, and a certain percent similar to a virus in a pangolin. And so their explanation is through evolution and zoonotic transfer, that's how we got it. And there is absolutely nobody in the scientific circles that is saying anything different than that. However, there is a lot of people, despite the consensus of scientists, that think maybe it was a weapon, and not just being like a conspiracist who doesn't trust the evidence, from looking at the evidence, from looking at the genetic sequence, and saying that it looks like, God forbid, someone purposely wanting to hurt humanity took, so to say, the best of all worlds of this virus from the pangolin and the bat, and created a virus in order to, God forbid, do awful things to humanity. And the likely place that it came from is this lab in Wuhan. So on the British news, this woman's coming forward and saying, yes, that is in fact what happened, and she has evidence, and she's going to release it this week. So I mean, it could just be nonsense. It could be some election ploy, or it could be she is going to release evidence. But on her interview, she made it sound like there was conclusive scientific evidence from the structure of the genetic strand that it was man-made, and in fact does not come from evolution. But as said, as of now, there is a consensus among scientists, experts, that it came from evolution and zoonotic transfer.
The reason I ask about that was because I kind of entered into the chat a little bit off kilter from the actual discussion. My understanding of COVID-19 is that it originated in a laboratory, but was transferred to bats and other animals through experimentation, and it wasn't for like a weaponized function. Originally, I remember reading articles back in 2017 about a virus that was being studied for its potential in cancer research, specifically as a tool to help treat cancer.
Well, that's not the scientific consensus. I'm saying you might have read a few articles or know a little bit of information, and I mean, the scientific consensus could be wrong, but no. I mean, the scientific consensus is that it's zoonotic transfer, and that it's a process of evolution. It's a novel coronavirus, meaning that it's a newly evolved coronavirus, and it isn't a coronavirus that existed in the stomachs of bats going back thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. It's a novel coronavirus, that mutated and evolved recently, probably in the last few years. And that is the consensus opinion basically among all scientists in terms of journals. Like, I don't think there's anyone in a journal, a respectable scientific journal or a large university or think tank that is saying anything different than that. If you ask popular opinion, popular opinion might have a sizable amount of people that think it was man-made, that it came from a lab, or the way people understand evolution versus what the consensus is of experts who understand evolution and how they explain what a zoonotic transfer is, what the novel coronavirus means, versus the belief and understanding of the average person that says, like, yeah, I mean, it was a zoonotic transfer, evolution, like, that's why we have coronavirus. And then even larger factors like environmental damage and extinction and various other explanations. But there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of lack of knowledge. But even saying you yourself, who 6 months into this, still do not recognize that the consensus of scientists say not what you're saying, and that would you go with most statistics that these belief systems, and it doesn't matter because scientific knowledge is limited, and there's not really an accepted group of elites or intellectuals that could get masses of all society on the same side of an issue.
Well, see, the scientific consensus doesn't necessarily contradict the claim that this virus originated in a lab, or at least a close strain, a similar strain to COVID-19. If it did originate in a lab and was transferred to animals as an experiment, then it could have mutated there. As that.
Yeah, that's a possibility, but that's not what the science said. And I thought about that also when I was first starting looking into it, just as looking through the logic of the possibilities. But that's not the scientific consensus. In fact, at most, a scientist will say that that's possible, but in all likelihood, in terms of like high 99.9% chance. The scientific consensus is that it comes from this natural process of zoonotic transfer where bats harbor and these coronavirus and make this evolution process possible, that there could be some newly evolved coronavirus in a bat coming out at any time, that percentage probability with like a bat like biting a pangolin that bites that licks a human that gets infected, or however the infection comes from the bat to leading to human infection, to leading humans transferring it to human, is just a matter of probability that at some point was almost guaranteed to occur, because you have these bats where this natural process of these coronaviruses evolving is occurring, and you have environmental degradation and ecological change where humans are moving into areas where where there's now more humans in these bats into contact than there were historically. So from that perspective, all the scientific experts say that that's what's going on here. It's this increased contact between humans and bats. It's got zero to do with a lab, absolutely nothing. It's remotely possible that that was the first transfer, but that's not the process. That's not what's going on. The fact is that you have these coronaviruses evolving in bats all the time, and anytime it could happen that one of them evolves into a more better one that would be better at spreading and, God forbid, killing humans. And it is just really a matter of statistics and probability of the tens of millions of these bats in China, and the billions and trillions of coronaviruses in the guts and stomachs and lungs of these bats, and the evolutionary process, and then the chance of those being zoonotically transferred from bats to humans. and whatever. I don't disagree with you, but I'm just saying there's an explanation that is the scientific consensus, and the scientific consensus does
You
not.
would wait for more scientific evidence to come out before accepting such a claim.
Well, I'm a skeptic, but I'm
Yeah.
not blind to admit what the scientific census is, and I'm not blind to say what I'm skeptical of, and I'm not going to falsely boost my cause by saying that I have friends in the mainstream movement when I don't.
Yeah, I don't think there's much wiggle room for interpretation. Yeah, they're just going the evolution way.
And to me, like,
Well, there's a big enough hole in evolution that you could back a truck through it. So it's not going to be, wrong. It's just not going to be very precise.
Well, when they discuss evolution in terms of virology, they're usually referring more to mutation, which is not macroevolution, as Darwinians tend to use the term to refer to.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that mechanism, and I think it's pretty easy to falsify. The mutation
and then
is not really how it works, because we have evidence for that.
the karmatic nature where you could look, okay, if nothing really matters and life and death doesn't matter, and it's just mechanical processes, that there's these viruses that just want to replicate, and some sort of evolutionary process that makes them better replicators, and they currently are in some reservoir, and when they're let out of the reservoir, they have the power to destroy humanity, God forbid, or something like that, and that's some karmatic mechanism that is known, like any human, anybody who's taken birth and lived on the planet for a few decades knows the concept of plague. And even if we don't understand viruses, that there is like this concept that there's these hidden diseases, and sometimes they're worse than others, and when they're worse than others, it could kill the huge parts of humanity, like just like percentages across the board of humanity could be killed by such diseases. And so if you just accept, I don't understand these things, and I'm going to listen to the experts, or more likely is I don't understand these things, and even though I don't understand them, I'm going to be forced to make a decision on the best of my ability on information I can't properly understand. And that's the situation we're in. And karmatically, you could say that this is how the virus spreads. These are the activities that statistically will make it less likely for the virus to spread, like social distancing and wearing masks and hand sanitizers and washing hands frequently, and all the various things that me and Jennifer covered on multiple streams, because it's important. And from the probability game, the more that a person keeps within these frameworks, the less likely it is to contract these disease. But then just also, can you take in information, be like, oh, this is a safer way to interact, so I'm going to change the way I used to interact to this more safer way to interact, which is actually quite difficult to, even to an enlightened person who really has, through process of decades of yoga, taken their life in actualization and master of their physical control of their body, and to say like everything, I'm fully conscious of every single movement of my human body and every single thought, and every, that yes, I could actively control and follow all of these regulations and wear a mask and social distance and all of these things perfectly. And so like it's pretty difficult actually, because people, even yoga masters aren't always aware of everything they do. And when you're looking at, did this, small particle get into the air, and could you inhale it because of the sloppiness of combined human interaction? And that's why we open week in review with a chant, because it's the power of combined human interaction. And you're saying, unfortunately, it would appear that the current state of collective karma is no, we cannot act in a way that is capable of slowing the spread of coronavirus. And the karmatically, the dangerous way of looking at it is we can't actually talk to each other without the risk of killing each other. So if it's just like, you're at the corner and you're like, should I go introduce myself to those people? And you look at the percent, I'm sorry to inform you that just going over and saying hi to those people, the karma is so bad that there's a 1% chance that that might result in your death, God forbid. And that's kind of like, coronavirus coming up and saying the collective state of the karma is like, oh no, like, what are you doing? Like, you can't speak to those people on this corner. You can't just go over and say hi, like everything is okay. Like that has, statistically, this probability of killing you. And it's pretty interesting. So that, me and Jennifer discussed it many times, the karmatic lessons. And I guess that's where spiritual mastery comes, is that most people don't learn karmatic lessons, let alone to people learn karmatic lessons well enough that they could interpret current events to the karmatic lessons that they're meant to, even like in a scientific way that's really just the balancing or lowering to an energy entropy state, and that what's going on is a naturally balancing conservation of energy.
Yeah. Exactly. I guess
I'm actually very curious as to the evolutionary explanation for the development of viruses, because I haven't ever actually seen an explanation in the context of evolution.
They don't have an answer for an origin, but in terms of the development, it's always the same. It's random mutation, which is selected for or against, leading in the long run to variations in the phenotype through preferred breeding status. That's the mainstream explanation.
From my understanding, they do have an explanation for an origin, but that all tests for the origin actually require an outside source of energetic input.
Well, they don't really understand it very well because they would have to be looking at spherical geometry in order to understand the folding of DNA properly. So have you ever seen a diagram of what DNA folded looks like?
Are you referring to the double helix?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you understand that it coils not only within itself, but amongst itself.
I'm trying to visualize that.
All right. Well, I'll see if I've got my drawing here. It's not the greatest one, and I suppose I could just pull it up online.
Yeah, maybe we should try to schedule like a different stream. Like that's we want to talk like week in review. Like if you guys want to do like physics 101 streams, or just like this is week in review, and now we mentioned a scientific concept that Howie's not familiar. Does it pay to do like a 10-minute timeout to do a physics lesson? And sometimes it does, but the purpose of week in review is efficiency in streaming, and the various things like what and why are we talking about, and where are we going with these conversations.
Just to quickly answer just to clarify, sort of, I want to put it into context that like this is not well understood because of geometry. So you see the folding in the DNA there, how it's like two coiled things together. That is within itself coiled. And then amongst itself coiled means that on top of that, that structure then coils up within itself. So it like folds. Once it's folded once, it folds up yet again. Hello? So
I see.
The reason why there's changes is because of quantum mind. And that is not well understood. So we can give you, like, Doovid doesn't believe in evolution, and neither do I, and I'm not sure if it's for the same reasons. We can tell you what the mainstream interpretation is, but the mainstream interpretation is really only telling you that there's some random mutations, and they may or may not be selected for in the long-term process of evolution.
Yeah, I want to separate are ideas that are non-dependent on the rejection of mainstream ideas. So the purpose of the multiple truth hypothesis, multiple axiom hypothesis is, say like, yes, of course I reject evolution, but enough of the axioms of people, scientists who believe in evolution, could be the same for to understand the same concepts. And something like medicine, which has many parts that are based off of evolution, and things like viruses, how we deal with viruses, what are viruses, is somewhat or largely dependent on the explanation of what's the force behind it. And so if you use evolution as the cause, and then viruses are actually very critical to this theory of evolution. One of the biggest proofs of the theory of evolution is the nature of how viruses work. And to some extent, even though evolution predates with Darwin, the modern current understanding of evolution is largely an extrapolation of the process we observe in viruses. And that's just because the replication cycle is so short. The reason we don't know about evolution is because it occurs over such a long period of time. However, viruses do could do millions of replications in days, and you could see to some extent that certainly in a case of a pandemic, that basically all variations get tried multiple times. That of 30,000 base pairs, and although interesting because the entropy we showed on previous streams that most mutations happen in the same places. But like in theory, that pandemic is enough that all variations are going to get played out, and so it's complicated. You really need the multiple truth hypothesis to say the mainstream uses this paradigm of evolution to understand this. And so if you're not using the mainstream paradigm, what paradigm are you using? And does the paradigm you use necessitate convincing people that the mainstream paradigm is wrong? And if it does, you're in a problematic situation, because basically you mean you have to like successfully carry out a revolution for anybody ever to make sense out of what you're saying. So therefore, if you could tie in your narrative with what you understand to be some of the main axioms of the mainstream system, usually that's where you'll find success.
There's an interesting point to be made here, because as you said, with viruses, we can see millions of replications of these organisms over the course of just a few days. And evolution relies on the concept that millions of organisms over long periods of time mutate and
Yes, Howie, you'd
change.
be amazed at how few people understand that that's actually contradiction.
Yes. And
Yeah, so it's
despite
like, how
the
do you
fact
go
that
about
we have
explaining it?
despite the fact that we have the common cold, which has existed on human record for thousands and thousands of years, which is, hundreds of trillions of mutations, and
And yet it's still
it still
common.
has it's still basically the same as it was thousands of years ago.
Yeah, so at some point we have to say the dominant paradigm is just wrong, and if we want to understand it, we need a different paradigm. And I guess I don't really acknowledge the dominant paradigm because it doesn't tell us a whole lot of information, does it? Like,
Well,
what's
no, I'm
that?
saying it's
Like when you said, Doovid, that there's still a lot of big questions.
well, there is a lot known. I mean, the current situation is showing how much is still unknown, but an accurate assessment of what is known, and then to understand genetic evidence. And now that we have complete gene sequencing, so it's like coronavirus, we know its exact genetic sequence. We know from testing, not every single virus, but a large example of how and when it's mutating. We could match it to known viruses in bats, previous ones, and the current understanding is it's a novel coronavirus. It's a new
Sure.
coronavirus that never existed before, but there's a genetic understanding to genetics also, to say that we have within the genetic code a lot of the historical remnants of the previous one. So the viruses you had thousands of years ago. Some of like the ones that are around today are their successful descendants. Maybe a lot of them died out, and then also is actually interesting evidence because viruses are basically everywhere. Viruses actually make up a substantial amount of the organic weight of the planet, and if you take out any given substance, water, dirt, anywhere, there's a huge amount of viruses, and the understanding is unclear that it's believed that all cells have viruses. So
yeah, like you gotta look at it in terms of information. Like we've got a lot of information about the physical structure of this thing, but what we lack information is how does the quantum mind influence the development of the physical body and vice versa. We're starting to get how the body makes the mind slowly, step by step, because those are things we can infer through experiment. But in terms of a theoretical model where you can go through these ideas and think them out, no, that doesn't exist, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's the common ancestor, but it's saying like, no, I mean, we didn't evolve from viruses, but the understanding of evolution is say that process that we see happening in viruses is the origin of us, and that it was just some device that chemically found a way to replicate, and from that first replication, that that turned into us, and you could see that with a virus, and if you reject that possibility, or even
I actually think I might reject that possibility because viruses aren't self-replicating without a host. So that suggests that the host came first and the virus is like a crystallized, like a dandruff from the host, which was some like primordial whatever
yeah.
came
So I mean,
first.
viruses don't even they're not a self-replicator. They're just a
They're not
sequence.
able to do it, so they cannot exist independently, which would suggest, according to traditional approach, that the non-virus would have had to come first. And a virus is basically, the way I understand it, is it's basically a way to keep us evolving, because evolving is why we survive. It keeps us in touch with the environment.
And this
Yeah, so
also brings us back to the concept of viruses as an agent of karma.
Yeah, you could think of them as like evolution karma, as in they're like intermediaries for the information that is going between the environment and the quantum mind, and actually allows for large scale adjustments to be made to the genetic code. It's like a fluffer for genetic freshness. Because what happens when it comes in, you're near replicating it with some antivirus antidote to break it, to make it so that it doesn't set off those alarms anymore.
yeah, if you want to cover the Christian Shades diagram from like a multiverse, and just a kind of way of looking at the areas of uncertainty of the origin of the virus, what a virus is, in these various factors of saying what defines life, and what defines replication, and then what are alternative realities to say, is it mechanical, and it's just a mechanical reality that something set in motion this, and it's deterministic in a mechanical way, the reproduction of the viruses, or is there some separate will of karma? And the greater science of like the wave reduction would be what caused the viruses the need to stabilize energy and to balance energy. And if it's the greater element of humankind and breaking the carbon cycle and these various environmental balances by destroying the environment, and the pushback comes in the form of God forbid, a virus and pandemic that slows the growth of humanity. So it's like a reduction in the wave state. So we know that the balances have to balance out, and if humanity destroys nature too much, there's going to be some form of pushback from nature that will return the greater balance, and that's just reduction to the lowest energy state. However, like, was it one single thing that happened. It's so at the state reduction, you're saying like, no, it was one bat who had one mutant in its stomach, who bit a pangolin, who had a mutant in its stomach, who got bit by another bat, who bit someone in the market or whatever the place, and it's factually that wave reduction of the occurrence that what we know as coronavirus today was the result of a very handful of very improbable events. However, from the greater karmatic perspective of the balancing of greater energy equations, we knew that some event like this to balance these greater forces was going to occur. But it had to occur through some event, and so that happened to be one bat and one pangolin and one person till now the spread, God forbid, the mass pandemic we're in.
I find it very interesting that you used the terminology of mechanics to refer to viruses, which often appear to be these nanoscopic machines. But I'd also like to take this back to a higher level analysis again, looking at civilization in relation to these pandemics over time. The Spanish flu began in 1920, which is 3 years after the Communist Revolution in Russia. And in America, we had the uprising of Antifa, which technically began in 2017. And this goes back to the karmatic.
Technically began in 2017. What's the beginning event?
Oh, that would be the riots that began shortly after Donald Trump was elected. We saw a huge uptick in these public protests of openly communistic groups. And yeah, I would say that karmatically, it seems that there is a correlation between pandemics and communist uprisings.
I think there's.
Yeah, I mean, could be. I mean, you could point out correlations between anything, but good luck with that.
Yeah, I mean the stock market's in trouble, right? Do you know to what degree this is just a distraction tactic?
Yeah, and then I was saying the nature of someone to point out patterns.
Before, it's not clear what distinguishes this one in particular.
You can just say it's the nature of people to try to point out patterns to understand things, but to think that you have useful information for somebody else from the pattern you pointed out, is questionable. Saying like, hey, I noticed the pattern and want to hear it, versus saying I have valuable information for other people based on research you've done.
Well, I was pointing out the correlation in response to the concept that you guys brought up about viruses being an agent of karma.
Well, I don't want to have an endless debate. So do you want to kind of keep us up to date what you're doing, what your streaming is, what you're planning on doing, and then maybe we'll let you go and we'll go back and we'll talk about some of these other things that we wanted to talk about.
Oh, all right. So this week I actually made $1,400 working with SuperLibrix.
Congratulations. Good for you. Good to make money. Good to take part of the capitalistic economic process.
Yeah. I might have to go without money for a little bit because he wants me to build the machine for him that he paid someone $3,500 for and did not receive, and that's going to take some time, and he won't pay me again until after it is done. Now, in other works that I've been doing, I've been going over some audiobooks and actually specifically one about consciousness and ethnobotanicals in their possible attribution to human consciousness throughout our development as a species. Today, I went through Food of the Gods by Terence McKenna. I'm not quite finished with it, but I'm close enough to the end where I can give a bit of a meta-analysis of the text. And
Are you
it's a
making
very...
streams? Are you saying, do you make your own stream? Did you do that on your own channel? Do you have a link to share?
I do not.
Yeah, I mean, presumably, if you want to take your streaming further, that you got to produce your own streams, and then you could come and you just share the link for the people who want to hear more. Then that's just the benefit, the use of the technology, and even the larger purpose of Week in Review. Trying to help you develop into a better streamer, but so you have to do the work. You have to produce content. Saying like, do you really want to produce content?
Well, I would like to get back into producing content.
And just like talking about producing content, like, is never going to produce content. Like, either you're going to have content or you're not. And saying like, if you have to keep on talking about it, you're saying like, no, if you're going to produce content, you just produce content.
Well, the issue is finding time, really. And I enjoy
nothing but
coming.
time. What else do you have to do with your time?
Well, that's
right.
your meditative state. Like, okay, I'm saying, if you want to like analyze and like try to like improve your life and make it more efficient, I mean, we might be able to do that also. But by saying like, yeah, I mean, you got to get your life together. You got to examine yourself. You got to get your priorities straight. And I mean, you don't have to. I mean, if you believe in free will, that's even what's the next topic we're going to discuss. But saying like, whatever perspective that you could take your life into your own hands, that will be relation to the result you're going to get. So like, if you don't produce content, no one's going to watch your content.
Yeah, it's really hard to produce content on a particular subject because you get to a wall eventually where you have to like push it to the next level. Like, what are you going to say? Yeah, we co-evolve with drugs. So what? Like, where do you go from there? I'm just spitballing. You could probably like do some sort of simulation of what, like some sort of visual simulation, like on an Oculus, about what the different drug states feel like. But again, limited utility. Unless you're going to do a full treatise with quantum mind stuff, you're not going to have enough material to really go into. Like, what are you going to say? Talk about the chemical structure of mushrooms? Ooh, there's like already infinity videos on that. So it is hard to push conversation forward. That's why I have respect for people like Kashif, that he's actually trying to push conversation forward, even if what he says doesn't make sense sometimes. He's at least trying to create content to some extent.
Was one of the topics on today's schedule consciousness?
Well, we're always talking about consciousness. It's like one of the themes of the show. I wouldn't say topic, it's more of a theme.
All right. Because I would like to discuss with you guys about that.
Sure.
What about consciousness?
Yeah, I think like we're not just kind of like having a chill stream about consciousness. Like I'm presenting information that like actually, if you don't have a background, will be extremely difficult to understand. So you're saying like, if you're interested in the theory of consciousness, if you're studying in the field of consciousness, if you're like reading a book or two a week or a year or a month, your theories, but like like, no, I mean, we're not necessarily having like laid back conversations on consciousness and the problematic nature of me and Jennifer are trying to have our ideas at a level where near the level of the people putting in the platform of the Science of Consciousness conferences, even though all those people have PhDs, and so it makes the problematic nature of discussing these things, and then from your level of how much homework are you willing to do.
Well, in today, what I really wanted to talk about was how there are multiple different theories of consciousness that may actually have to be accumulated, combined, and accounted for in order to fully understand consciousness. For example, the bicameral mind as well as triune brain theory, which both go to display the complexity of the human brain. But I would also go further in relating the bicameral mind and triune brain to the quantum mind itself.
Well, the question is, when did consciousness arise? And people are going to say, well, it arose because we took mushrooms. And it's like, well, what is it?
Yeah, but everyone's got opinions on these things. And I'm not saying people's opinions are completely worthless, but they're largely completely worthless from the scientific perspective. So unless people are willing to enter the scientific process of it, there's really nowhere to advance in like we can review these circles with people who just sort of say have introspective theories of consciousness, or occasionally read a report. And we're trying to put forward real theories, and saying, like, we're glad people have interest in it. And my interest in consciousness goes beyond just the scientific mainstream implications, and we are trying to find people that are interested in the topic, and push it forward, because it is such a large topic, and saying that there's hundreds of competing theories. Every major religion has multiple conflicting systems, let alone the different systems of the world, let alone the scientific proposals to understand it. For spiritual systems, people like Doowovid, who said science will never explain it, that it does not in fact come from anywhere in the material realm, and trying to scientifically show what the limits of understanding the material realm is. So when we look at something like consciousness, we know the limit of our knowledge level. And these things are pretty complicated, that just the philosophy, epistemology, metaphysics, and all these various things. So it is the nature, like God. Even retards have opinions about God. So, consciousness, like even retards have opinions about consciousness. But from a systematic level of trying to advance understandings, it's like, well, you need a certain level of effort, and that's what we're trying to do here. We can review. We're trying to just advance me and Jennifer idea and recruit people, but it's difficult to get people to cooperate. It's difficult to get on the same platform, and it's people have to be respectful of not wasting other people's times, or someday where finances and different resources are platforms, and that's why universities have decorums and codes and all these various things, because it's and you say, okay, don't have the luxury of operating within those realms, but you still need decorum, and just like, okay, we're not going to get on modern day debate, because like the type people we're working with, those structures don't really exist, and these various things. And so Doowovid takes my time very seriously, and I don't like to waste a bunch of time, but I'm trying to push that upon you in terms of and Jennifer also, in saying, like, just Doowovid will be that voice telling you, like, make progress. Like, what you're doing is not actually making progress. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so an example of meta-analysis in this case would be to look at several different consciousness theories and compare them and decide which one you think is the best, and defend it. Just to say, oh, I read about consciousness, it's like, I have read some of these consciousness theories. They don't define consciousness, or they give terrible definitions for it.
Well, what I'm saying is that I'm actually working to combine multiple theories into one cohesive theory. For example, like using...
that if you've done research, no one has been able to do satisfactorily for human history. You might want to ask yourself what sets you apart.
Yeah, it's largely a non-scientific approach.
It's a series of steps. Like I used to say this to Gandalf too. It's a series of steps. If you want to learn how to do meta-analysis, you have to understand what it even is, and it's a cross comparison / argument for a superior perspective. But it doesn't even have to be that, because Doowovid doesn't always want to say one perspective superior to another. He just wants to go through the whole gamut of perspectives.
And that's more closely related to what I'm trying to do here.
Unfortunately, you make yourself sound stupid from a certain, like what you need to do is hit the books and study more. So you're ready in your own So to say, you demonstrate your own lack of
Well,
understanding of the subject that you're trying to talk about just by trying to talk about it.
In what ways relating the quantum mind to the complexity of the human brain itself an uneducated take?
Well, because you don't know the lexicon or the nature of the theories you're talking about. To just say, saying like, I want to unify the world. Yeah, I want to make harmony out of all the disharmony. So you're saying like, okay, like I'm trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness. Yeah, I think I'm going to take from the best, pick and choose from the best of all the theories, and then I'm me Howie, who can't even
Howie,
use my
who the
real
hell do you
name
think
on
you
YouTube.
are?
And I'm not saying like it's good that you're trying
haven't-
that, but it's saying like, yeah, I mean, you just make yourself like a dumbass.
Well, I've only really stated the main thesis. I haven't actually gone in depth as to what it entails.
Yeah, like I've solved all the problems to all the world's questions, and like you can't deny it because I haven't told you yet. And if you're only nice to me, I'll tell you. But as of now, I can't even tell you my real name.
Conops is
like,
exactly the same way. Conops is the same way. He's like, why didn't you ever ask me about my perspectives? It's like, guys, learn to rub two brain cells together and actually form a coherent opinion, not just feels.
Yeah, I mean,
like you come up with the theory first. First, you come up with the theory, then you assert that you have the theory. You don't say, I'm going to come up with a theory in the future, because then you're just setting yourself up for failure.
Well, the theory is still in the works, but I have the basic outline formulated.
I mean, God forbid,
and
really,
what that is a more emergent phenomena as opposed to a top-down phenomena, which is what your theory of the quantum mind is.
Do you have any idea?
You're just parodying Jennifer's LARP.
Where's the top and where's the bottom? And do you have any idea how many people have tried this before? Like that's the importance of a historical analysis. It's like what has been attempted in this domain and what successes have been brought to bear. And to think that you can make a bigger contribution than the combined contribution of the people in the last 100 years is like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but you have to understand the magnitude of the task you're undertaking.
Well, I mean, really, it's your LARP. So Howie is just marrying your LARP.
I actually came up with my theory before I started promoting it, because that's what makes logical sense.
Yeah, but I'm saying that Howie just has like your LARP without the theory.
Well, I technically started on my theory before I introduced it.
In terms of like, Jennifer and Howie, the LARP is basically the same. And now Howie's going to go to the other end too. He's going to say, no, I had my theory before I created the LARP. Like, I really do have a theory that explains everything. And
I don't have a precise theory, but I have a generalized. I don't have a precise theory, but I have a generalized.
And
so you're like begging for freshman admittance. You're not applying for a job as a freshman. You're like applying for admittance. You're like to a program. So you should look at it that perspective. It's saying like you can't apply for the job of being a professor if you're not qualified, and if you're enrolling, enroll.
Would I be able to explain my the generalized theory?
No, I mean generally you have to have something published. Like no one's gonna have the patience for some, like even to listen to the LARP. Like at least Jennifer has had a blog for years, and
And I do appreciate that Doooovid takes the time to read my blog, and I encourage people who have a lot of ideas to take it up, because it is a good discipline that can make you better at writing.
The LARPs, because like you're saying like, no, I mean like I'm getting bored with this, and saying like I gotta make money, I gotta make results, and it's saying like no, I think these LARPs are a waste of time. That's why I say no. Unfortunately, like Howie, good guy, I encourage you in your studies, but like no, your idea is worth $0. Your idea is a waste of my time, and so that I'm telling you as your friend. And so I'm encouraging you to study these things more and to keep on thinking about it. But so the market value of your idea right now is nothing, and anybody who listens to you is just doing you a favor.
Until I get something published, right?
Well, you got to go through the process. So it's saying, so do you want to?
But I can't tease out the idea in your company.
Well, you can, but it's saying that that's not what Weekend Review is for. Weekend Review is to review something you've already done. And I'm saying that Weekend Review is to help you create study groups and to find people who find these subjects interesting.
Well,
That's why we're not teasing you about it. It's saying like, yes, like, like I'm encouraging you and other people to stream and talk about this, but like, don't live in fantasy world, and don't create a LARP, and don't waste people's time.
Well, then let me stop wasting your time. Let me explain what this theory is. There are different levels of consciousness. That's axiom number 1. There are different kinds of consciousness. Axiom number 2. And consciousness arises out of the complex interactions between matter in the quantum state. That would be axiom number 3. Now, the reason why there are different levels of consciousness is because the mind of a bee or an insect is nowhere near as complex as the mind of a human. The human brain is the most complex piece of matter that we have in existence. So the quantum interactions between particles making up the brain is actually vastly more complex than the mind of a bee. The quantum interactions making up the mind of a bee.
Yeah, I mean, this is just like some like junior high, like not even high school, like elementary school science fair stuff where you throw the word quantum in there, and I mean, we're encouraging you to think about this stuff, and it's good to read and study it. But like saying like, you honestly think you have something to bring forward and offer in the advancements of these ideas, that you understand these ideas well enough that you're gonna that someone's gonna listen to you to teach them.
Well, this would also provide a testable hypothesis.
Sorry, what? It's actually very hard. It's actually very hard to engineer testable hypotheses. Like, people are so hung up on falsifiability, but engineering testable hypotheses is really hard. And that's what you really want to be able to do, because you want to be sure that there's no room for an alternative interpretation than your own, because your experiment's going to show whatever it's going to show. You want to nail the interpretation.
It is very difficult to make a testable hypothesis.
This is what student loans were created for. Just saying like just to increase the amount of seriousness that people put into this stuff. And saying like, it's good that people think about it, but I wonder like if you were racking up tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt while you're thinking about it, if you take it a little bit more seriously.
Hello?
Yeah, but again, I don't want this to get into like a LARP stream, although I encourage you to do it. And if you want to schedule with Jennifer or with other people in the interest spheres, I encourage you to do that. But like, no, like write a paper, come back to us. Like, we can review. We'll probably be doing it in a few weeks from now also. And so like, if between now and then you write a paper or do a video, like come back to us with that. Like, but we don't want to spend a week in review helping you hash out your theory. Although we don't want to discourage you from doing that, but like, get it together, have a result, and then come back and present it.
Okay, Howie's still muted. Not sure what you want to say to that. If you have any,
well, I mean, I don't mind how that's why I wanted to come on and just advance and saying I'm not discouraging. Like, I mean, Jennifer, your time is your own time. Like, if you have time to have these chill streams or teaching streams, and I encourage Howie to continue looking at it. But like, I don't want to turn week into review into a chill stream where it's just like people talking about consciousness and like, no, I want to reach out to, I mean, it's kind of like pushing Jennifer. Like, I want the people who are taking part in the Science of Consciousness conferences to come on and present their stuff. And you're saying like, no, like we're not holding there right now. We got guys like Howie presenting whatever their stuff. Like we got to like up our game to get to the level where the and it's saying we might not have anyone to present it to. It's saying like, the people watching us, like Howie and that, like, they want to teach them. saying they're not going to appreciate that we're getting some audience with some great scholar on the subject is going to present information, because they're saying like, no, I should be the one teaching them, and so basically everyone's a loser.
Alrighty. So, welcome to the chat, Nicholas Petrus and Quebecois. I guess JF's stream just ended. We can segue into table 8.4 if you want. I have that up on the screen.
But yeah, Nick, are you a Pantera fan? I was going to list this. I got my 5 original album classics: Pantera, Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display of Power, Far Beyond Driven, Great Southern Trendkill, and Reinventing the Steel. I was going to list this one, but I'm not sure if you're a Pantera fan. So it sounds like he is a Pantera fan. You might want that one. Interesting music. So what do you want to do, Jennifer? Like I thought it'd be useful to cover some of these charts in the Shade book and just look at the current model's understanding of consciousness in the quantum ramifications, and maybe to go over some of my chess studies, to just be where I cover historically from when people looked at chess through introspection, where you found the top players and asked them what was going on in their head, and like the Freud and the psychoanalysis movement, to the later behavioralist pushback, where introspection became largely unscientific. It doesn't matter a person's own introspection about what they consider was going on in their head. And this is just specifically to chess, where you have giving a person a problem to look at, where say there's an optimal solution, but it's difficult to see, and how people think about it and talking out loud of what they're thinking, to the process what actually goes through the person's mind when they make a move, in the various ways that the scientists have been able to get at testing that, and trying to really determine what's going on, what's the process, and what's the difference between an expert and a beginner, the various skill levels. And so it's interesting from these levels. It's like Howie or anybody, everybody does introspection. You could ask somebody like, what was going through your mind, and they could give an answer. But from the current state of science of consciousness, introspection is not a valid form of scientific proof. And even surveys or conglomerates of speaking to a bunch of people and introspection or blind test of introspection is largely not considered scientific. And so I thought these Christian Shade charts on the nature of free will would somewhat kind of point at that, where the person's narrative of the narrative in their mind and the actual decision they make are probably not correlated. So if you ask a person why they did something, they do have a narrative that they've thought about, and they might accurately be telling you, this is what went on in my mind. However, that may not be related to the decision-making factor. And so how do you test that? And so chess is probably one of the better fields in all of psychology and thought processes that has been tested. And it's been tested over hundreds of years. And so that might be an interesting. So I'm not sure. What you want to do, Jennifer?
Well, I've got these tables loaded up here, all of them that you sent me, and I didn't know if there's anything in particular you wanted to go over, because when I read these things, I just get a little bit confused. I'm still trying to figure out like where exactly the multiverse comes into the picture.
Well, the multiverse is an explanation of what reality is. And so the multiverse is saying that there are, in fact, multiple parallel realities. And so when you say what happened. It doesn't have to be that one choice happened and the other choice didn't happen. It just means that one path of reality was chosen, but that other path of reality still exists. And that's, the fundamental concept, the difference between the Copenhagen, the Newton light form of quantum mechanics, and the understanding what happens when the wave equation collapses to one single reality. So the multiverse stems essentially from an interpretation of the wave equation. But if you want to put that into this chart here, where we're looking just at consciousness, what's going on when a person makes a decision. Are you purposely taking the chart down?
Yeah, I just wanted to show my diagram that I had just made because I want to be able to integrate that into the multiverse framework if possible, because I mean there's just something like anti-conservation of energy that kind of emanates from the multiverse. So I'm just trying to maybe marry it to my own understandings. But
It was like
that
Howie who
diagram's back.
had a theory. I'm saying, like, he might even have like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. End of the day, like, the theory is going to be a few axioms. And so Christian Shade doesn't mention the multiple truth hypothesis, but if you're looking here in just this chart, he has the determinants of vectorial decisions in the multiverse. Then this description, impact on decisions, and practical considerations. So under unconscious motives of the decision makers, so these are determinants of vectorial decisions in the multiverse. And so there's the unconscious motives of the decision makers, and here he's saying that includes preferences within the person, but unknown to him, hence not explicit part of decision models. So that these unconscious motives are unconscious preferences, and because they're unconscious, the person themselves doesn't even know about them. The impact on decision, potentially substantial if the unconscious drivers are stronger than those that are consciously understood, undermining seamlessly rational judgment. And the practical considerations, the more the unconscious motives are known to the decision maker, the more they can explicitly be integrated into decision models, or those models debiased. And then the next determinant of vectorial decisions of the multiverse, unknown motives of other decision makers, conscious and unconscious. The question as to what extent animals are involved here will not be addressed in his book, but say you're just restricting the allocation of consciousness to certain realities when operating close to a fringe consciousness cluster. So saying the person, so to say, allocates their consciousness. So whatever motive that the person does, it doesn't have to be in the free will. It could be an understanding that my consciousness is being allocated, that whatever limit there is to my consciousness to think about multiple things at a time, that may be beyond my control. Like as a meditator, we could question these thoughts in terms of meditation. But so here he's talking about unknown motives of other decision makers and the restriction of allocation of consciousness, most substantial when preferences are in conflict with the restrictions undermining seamless rational judgments. So we're talking about dissonance. And the practical considerations, understanding mainstream and deviating opinions in mind clusters or the structure of interaction may make this an explicit part of decision models in certain cases. And the next determinant, impact of other, including non-human factors, the integration of the macro world probabilities, mostly conscious activities, potentially high impact informing about chances and risk associated with different alternatives. Next determinant, utility, interdependencies between different versions of the individual. The potential
So it's like
variety.
a layered approach to motives. Because there's another page there. It's on 2 pages. So
Yeah, so let me finish this last one, utility, and then the last determinant. So utility, interdependencies between different versions of the individual, potential variety, seeking across versions of the individual, hard to judge since experiences of other versions are unknown to us, careful deliberations about extreme versus rather moderate alternatives might have an impact. And so you have the last determinant up there. Oh, free will. So the last determinant, so we had the other factors of unconscious, unknown, external interdependencies to the final free will, deciding on the emphasis put on different realities within consciousness. Final implementation of a vectorial choice, however, is not experienced per definition within consciousness of each version of the individual. The impact of free will higher, the larger the knowledge of the above factors, and the smaller, therefore, the impact of the unconscious and other potentially uncontrolled factors. So free will is enhanced with higher degree of deliberation and usage of decision models as aids, enhanced also within knowledge about other drivers. So this is his model, which is going to fit into his quantum multiverse understanding about where free will exists in the quantum reality.
So it's like on the final shell of all the nested shells of like this hierarchical decision model he's got here.
Yeah, and he also even tries to incorporate like Penrose Hameroff in this, and it's saying like it's, you know, I encourage people to read the whole book, and you know, he's kind of summing it up in one chart, and he has the other table 8.5 if we could look at that one also. And my research on chess is I'm going to focus on this idea of chunking, and when you look at like free will, you look question of like memory and what happens when you recognize a pattern and you see a chunk, and it could be like, you know, there's two options for whatever reason, and a person recognizes that two options are ahead of them, and then one of those options becomes the option that went down. Or it could be, you know, it doesn't have to be just two, it could be multiple. And it appears to us that we have an understanding that there were trade-offs of the various options, and possibly an understanding that maybe we chose to choose one of these various options. But that may not be the case. And just because our mind has this understanding. So from this chunking and search idea that we'll talk more about chess, it's just energy in terms like I see something and I need to attach it to a pattern. And maybe there's two competing patterns that are looking, is this the pattern I match it to, or is that the pattern I match it to? And that's largely an unconscious or uncontrolled decision why one pattern gets chosen and the other rejects it. However, there's reasons in a narrative associated with it that a person could recite back that probably does not directly affiliate with whatever caused one or the other to be decided. So this is going to get pretty intense. I mean, did you want to make a comment, Jennifer? You want me to continue with table 8.5?
It's interesting just to add a little bit like the difference between a free will model versus a decision-making model versus making decisions based on ideology versus retrospectively justifying one's decisions as in conformity with some pre-existing ideological identity. Those, thinking about those ideas, I think in succession sort of hints at why the subjective experience hasn't been considered valuable in the eyes of science. But it kind of does seem that at some stage it needs to be incorporated. But it has to include the fact that we all sort of lie to ourselves, and understanding what the form per se of those lies might be.
Yeah, so when the science where you look at, you know, the conglomeration of a lot of bottom-up processes like, you know, neural signals and sensory perception to create some larger level of abstraction, and even decision-making or free will, where your free will and choice decision-making could be an illusion. So just saying the mind records the narrative. So you're saying like there is no you to lie to yourself. It is just an affiliated, associated memory. So the sense perception came in, and there was uncertainty about how to understand the sense perception. And therefore, there were different memory chunks to pattern this unknown sense perception in. So just saying we're going to have to chunk it to a known pattern, even though it doesn't actually match the known pattern. And there's a narrative affiliated with these various patterns, and that will be our memory, our bias. So if you ask someone, why did you do it? They might tell you, like, I was thinking and I saw I had these, different options, and they had certain different costs and benefits, and I weighed it and made this decision. And so unconsciously that some sort of circuitry in the brain naturally goes through a process, or what most theories of consciousness are going to give a completely alternative explanation to how decisions are made. And at the same time, they're going to give an explanation for why we think the way we think, separate from why we made the decision. And so this is going to be very interesting. And, that's why I want to, you really need the multiple truth hypothesis. And me and Jennifer, to, some point, 72 episodes, and we're almost still getting started because there's such a big topic, but hopefully almost to the point where we're going to start conversing with some of the bigger names, doing research on the subject to, to really try to understand these processes and say, yes, my system, so to say, explains how decisions are made without free will, and how the illusion of free will is predicted in the mind at the same time, and to even create some sort of testing regimen.
It's not the mind that predicts.
Well, let me finish, and to create a regimen of testing that will demonstrate that people will act in a certain way, and then they'll explain it in a different way, in a predicted pattern. They will explain this was the sensory input, this is what caused the person to act, and then this external separate thing caused the person to explain the way they acted in a separate method, and it's almost testable. In fact, some of these tests, at least in terms of chess, have already been tested, where people programmably, predictively make a certain type of mistake and then explain it in a way that doesn't correspond with the evidence that of why it happened in that way.
There's an interesting revelation in the chat. Apparently, JF thinks that this is what his friends are saying. Nothing to do with us being in a black hole. But I'll have to check it out and see. You think he might be trying to bait me?
Well, I mean, it could be getting into the realm of science fiction, just a LARP, where when you're not in a community of scientists that are going to hold you to scientific rigors, that he's kind of playing to his audience, and his audience may not be as knowledgeable as him. So rather than doing his homework, he just tricks them, and usually that backfires. At some point, he's got to do the homework, and he can't pretend like he's done the homework just because his current audience isn't knowledgeable enough to know the difference.
Just coming back to these tables, I think I get the idea. But how does this imply a multiverse?
Well, it doesn't. I think like this. I mean, I encourage people to read the whole book. I mean, so let's go through table 8.5 just to get off the screen. And it's saying he goes through his books where he tries to prove the multiverse or how this theory, but really this table is just a model of free will and decision making, and related to his theory of the multiverse. But saying like, no, I encourage people to read the whole book, but if you had to reduce it to a table, here it is. Okay, so here is the spirit of effectuation to vectorial decisions, as opposed to the last more crude material model. So you have the unconscious motives of the decision maker, safeguarding against the allocation of consciousness potentially harmful realities driven by unconscious motives in case such motives are partially known, implementing self-binding commitments. The theoretical developments perspectives, better understanding changes in allocation of consciousness when unconscious motives become conscious, better understanding and developing self-binding commitment strategies for different scenarios. So unfortunately, Christian Shade probably is not utterly familiar with dissonance theory, because I think reality is what me and Jennifer have talked about, and even on my channel and some of my streams, is relating to this, to dissonance theory and a balance of energy. So that Christian Shade did a commendable job writing this book, and that's why I'm publicly using it, to help teach people these ideas. But no, I think Christian Shade's idea would have been better expressed here, with dissonance and a balance of energy. But here he's looking at the spirit of effectuation as this allocation of consciousness to potentially harmful realities driven by unconscious motives, in case such motives are partially known. So you could look at that just a balancing of energy in what me and Jennifer call dissonance theory, right?
It's certainly a helpful way of looking at it. I think even just saying the word helps build knowledge.
Yes. So let's see. Is unknown motives of other decision makers, conscious and unconscious. It's impossible to know these motives, but partially possible to influence them. Personal communication with closer individuals, anonymous communication, social media with more distant people, better understanding the impact of different types of communication on the alignment of different individual realities, developing prediction techniques for movements of mind clusters. So it's saying that what caused the person to make the decision and how they explain that decision to other people probably makes sense that those two do not correlate, that there's going to be a dissonance between how a person came about making their decision from like a mechanical reality and how they explain that to different people. So I'm even trying to add on to what Shade did here, but thank God for Shade, because I'm impressed with I don't know, impressed by saying that there's not much good material on the subject, so props to him for at least doing this. The impact of other, including non-human factors, making small steps, staying flexible to see how things develop and react later, trial and error approaches rather than big jumps, affordable loss principle, and satisfactory rather than optimizing, application of further development of the toolbox already proposed within the effectuation approach. So it's kind of like a meditative model where you could actuate higher levels of free will within a system. Utility, interdependencies between different versions of the individual. Do you have the last part, or is that it? The decisional conflict stepwise approach avoids extreme trade-offs, simulations of different outcomes with different weights on attributes. So
It's up there now.
and free will. Stepwise approach leads to many small decisions where each of them free will may play out. Effectuation generates more feedback on previous choices so that learning is enhanced, increasing the chance of learning about the other determinants. Theoretical development, understanding free will enhancing activities requires further developing a science of consciousness. It is clear that I'm not the first one to propose the need for a science of consciousness. Indeed, the Towards the Science of Consciousness conference is a clear sign that the need is seen by many. However, I would like to argue that the cluster mind multiverse injects a larger need for quick progress into this endeavor. It makes it inevitable to proceed this way, analyze the impact of consciousness on vectorial choices might constitute an important subfield in the area. And free will enhanced with many small iterative choice in the spirit of effectuation, or rather a few big ones more consistent with causation. So what do you say?
Well, I think it might be a good time to talk about teasing out the difference between correlation and causation, because we hear about it so much, but at what point can you step back and make the leap from correlation to causation? You hear about it a lot, it's like a mantra for these people. It's like, correlation is not causation. Okay, well then what is correlation and what is causation? Because correlation could just be like, it's a statistical measure, so you have like a correlational coefficient. So you can have like a 0.75 or whatever correlation between two things that are obviously unconnected. I've seen, diagrams like this before, like something to do with pirates. But yeah. It's would
It's
you
almost
agree that it's
elementary.
like a would you agree that it okay. Would you agree that it's like a layered approach, this table 8.5? It's like a layers of possible motive trees, just and the point is to sort of show the complexity in the computation of consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like a meta-analysis, and it's going together with chunking evidence, where there's, so to say, layers of chunks, where on any process from if you're going to understand it on a neural level, and I'm going to be arguing against this understanding, but just to present it from the most common understanding, that there's a neural level of chunking of whatever the lowest level of memory information that's going to constitute a chunk. When sensory information comes, it is recognized in memory between multiple chunks of do I already have some sort of precursor for how to interpret this information, and then it goes through a chunk, and eventually the totality of all of the sensory input, or all of the current chunks that are being activated by whatever reason in the mind, are reduced to one.
Yeah.
And or the experience of consciousness, when you say there is an I that experiences consciousness. And so
You got to make sure you distinguish between chunks and chunking, because like you have to properly define the chunk so that it lines up with the biological imperatives.
So if you look at, this is where the level where so I mean, I did my stream on chess this week, and the chunking theory in chess starts with researchers in 1973 called Chase and Simon, who are really from the first to propose it, and it's related to evidence that they were trying to figure out what's the difference between better chess players and worse chess players, and it did all these series of tests, and it was very difficult to find some objective level other than just playing and being better at chess, of what happens differently in the mind of someone that's better at chess at worse. And then they discovered this memory thing, where they show a position to a person that a better chess player has a much better chance of remembering it than a worse chess player. And that's how they devised this theory of chunk, which is similar to speed reading, that better players, because they have more experience with the game, have larger chunks, just like speed reading, where they could chunk together the pieces on the board into a single piece of information, and therefore the process of storing into short-term, long-term memory, and these things going back to like 1973 to the studies today in the various ideas that we know, and even like studying eyeball movement and CAT scans, and I'm going to be covering all this stuff on my channel. But from the neurological perspective, for the idea that we do not have free will, and this kind of using how the computer goes about thinking to extrapolate how the mind might perform thought, but like the Alpha Zero artificial intelligence programs, they have a Monte Carlo simulation, and they have a goal like winning the game, and they go with the option that gives them the highest percent chance of winning, or the other machines that have some sort of algorithm, and they're going to go with numerically the option that produces the highest value according to the algorithm. So that model of consciousness, chunking, could eliminate free will. We're just on every level of sensory information. We receive input and have whatever the history of our filings or actions, and it's just a matter of which chunk it's going to choose. and it's largely a predetermined process of factors that this is the input, this is going to be the chunk, and it may be beyond calculation, but it's a determinative picture to if there is a greater I did this, but the I is made up of trillions or 10 to the 20 some neurons firing, but there could be qualitatively larger trends, vibrations from my videos on my channel, the current best understandings, like a larger resonance frequency of similar vibrations. So if you imagined, trillions is too small of a number, but trillions of these chunks vibrating at different energies all in the brain, and certain of those chunks resonating so that enough of the chunks resonate at a certain frequency, and if enough chunks resonate at the same frequency, that will be brought to our larger consciousness. And so, like Howard was saying, most theories have some sort of bottom-up process of countless, trillions, 10 to the 20 of these chunks firing at the same time, and then somehow vibrating on some sort of similar resonance frequency, so that all of these various chunks form a larger picture. So this is the most common understanding that relates neurology, evidence, and theory, besides for obviously the introspection perspective of how do I know what's going through my head, because I introspect it because I'm the one who's thinking it. And so this chunking type theory is largely determinative and goes with the best of the evidence, and would look at these introspection are just kind of like spark chunks. And the chunk that we have sparked that I give the narrative may have absolutely nothing to do with the decision that I made. So I was trying to explain to Jennifer, I appreciate her giving me the long time to go through this whole process to explain this. But saying the input came, and there were all these various chunks, and the resonance frequency eventually created this quality where enough of these chunks were resonating on the same frequency to draw my attention, where I know Doooovid is thinking about this topic and has a certain portion of my consciousness devoted to this. And then if you ask me, how did that come to be? I would not accurately describe to you how that came to be, because I don't even know how that came to be. I would just get a random chunk, like a narrative, that would be sent to my head to answer the question. And in my own head, whatever my consciousness, the I that is telling you I am now explaining to you why I did this, is where in reality, like, no, I'm just reporting to you what is resonating in my brain at the highest frequency, even though that may have nothing to do with the resonation frequency that actually created my action.
Yeah, so in this rather well described world, the self is the chunk recognizer, recognizes chunks by means of computation. And quantum mechanically, computation always involves energy transference. Because if a waveform's collapsing, energy is going somewhere it wasn't before, because you have more microstates available entropically. So that does work. And then your basic cluster of like foundational questions would reduce to something of the form of, is the thing that recognizes chunks also a chunk?
We're saying there is no thing that there. What it's saying is consciousness is an illusion. So the narrative, what causes me to act, is just some sort of integral of sense perception and chunking. That however the sense perception comes in a deterministic way, that will determine through the selection of resonance frequencies.
Yeah.
One decision, one course of action.
Right.
And so the narrative in my head of when someone asks me, why did I do this? And I explain them to them, is also just a resonance frequency of chunks that may or may not have any relationship to the resonance frequency that caused me to do what I do. And that's how the, so to say, current state of the science of consciousness says free will is an illusion. And these resonance frequencies in our head that tell us there's a me thinking can be explained by these processes and don't actually influence our control of our own body. So the fact that I have an explanation I'm thinking right now, and I could tell you what I'm thinking right now, does not conflict with the fact that it's deterministic, and what I'm thinking right now does not determine my action, or nor do I have the ability to control what I'm thinking, so to say, because what I'm thinking is just a reduction state of energies of resonance frequencies.
That doesn't imply you don't have control over it. It just implies that the mechanism of control may be counterintuitive.
Yeah, so that's the shade model where there's an allocation of energies. And from my perspective, I wanted to put in like a vector field of differential equations where there's sinks, and we have a very limited amount of effort that could cause a very small change in the trajectory of our action, but that small change in the trajectory of our free will could vastly change, what sink or source we might have been moving towards. And so looking historically, when I try to create a narrative of the entity, the me that was the me when I was born, to the me that was I am today, or even the me that was the me in my past lives, to the me that will be the me in my future lives, and there's some sort of greater narrative, and say, okay, well, a factual narrative is maybe just atomic particles, that the atomic particles in the me were in this state, and at the current state, maybe almost none of the atomic particles that are the me are the same atomic particles, that the actual material in me has been transferred, and the me when I was born has almost none of the same me that is me now, or these various things, where if me and Jennifer were going to debate on modern day debates, I was going to argue that yes, there is a direction of the conglomerates of evidence of quantum effects and quantum mind, and no, it will not explain consciousness or the soul. And yes, the path of introspection in the ancients and the scriptures is not worth dismissing, and probably true, and that we cannot look to science to answer these questions. And the direction would appear to be that we're almost exhausting the realm of science, and we should be able to see the map, and the map is not including science answering these questions.
If we're going to use science, we need to incorporate sensory perception by calibrating it, by factoring in the fact that testimony isn't always reliable. And in fact, there's like a domain of things, i.e. those that cause cognitive dissonance, where you can predict before you even ask the question that it's going to be an unreliable answer by nature of its being so statistically likely to cause cognitive dissonance. Until we do that, I think you're right. We've reached the ends of like non-conscious science, or non-living, subjective consciousness mediated interpretations need to be brought in, because we've reached the limit of what a purely inanimate approach, i.e. modeling consciousness with non-living things, we've reached the limit of what that can tell us. But it still has told us quite a bit. Like, I'm not saying throw it out. I'm just saying that it's going to be a metaphor, right? Like it's not a beautiful place. It's a painting of a beautiful place. You can tell that the painting is depicting something real, but the painting is not really the real place that it's depicting. And that's what I wanted to come to with what you were saying about resonance. And I think that pretty much matches with my model, where you have would you agree that we have an infinite number of thoughts that we could potentially think? I would agree with that. Just to sort of come out, like,
well, yeah,
cards on the table.
I'm
not trying to trick Doovid. I'm just asking if that seems like a reasonable assumption.
Well, because largely saying that thoughts originate in the non-material realm, kind of like the dualism, Platonism, that the concept of the chair doesn't exist in the material realm; it exists in the spiritual realm. So with it that so to say, within a materialistic perspective of using millions of chunks or ideas or the infinite, obviously in terms of combinatorics, so that there's millions of combinations, versus separate spiritual realm where yeah, likely there's an infinitude or even size of infinity of ideas. I mean, even that's the multiple truth hypothesis, that in reality there's likely infinite truths.
So all I said was an infinity of possible thoughts. But then I want to furthermore assert that there was some type of a finite basis within the structure, which is, maybe you could call those the patterns. So you have maybe 10 patterns or 20 patterns that you're capable of recognizing. Because I want to come back to what you were saying, David, about resonance. Because I think when you get into a subject like resonance,
Or
a
it's
little
not even in
confusing.
chunks. Just to give the number by chess studies, that an expert chess player has well over 50 to 100,000 just chess patterns, just chess chunks. So I mean, these levels of chunks is not going to be 10, 20 in terms of, it's probably going to be trillions. And in terms of what is a trunk, what is a chunk? Does a chunk exist in the material realm? Is some sort of pattern stored in neural memory, or is a chunk some sort of non-material spiritual interlay between quantum factors in the material realm and other things? But at this point, within
it's that one.
Within the science that they're looking like, chunk is some sort of memory information stored in neurons, would be the mainstream understanding, that it's like a mechanical circuit of computers, that somehow there's some sort of neural wiring caused by an event, and then therefore when the sensory input comes, that this pre-stored neural wiring could be used for that event, and then you could just trigger that pre-stored wiring, in that in reality all memories, all events cause these to do it, and that the more events or the more input, the more backup they get, the more the wiring, and hence most of the theories of consciousness are based on these resonating frequencies, where literally consciousness is large portions of the brain resonating at the same frequency.
Where is that theory being presented exactly?
I read it on my channel. I mean, it's I think it's a Jew actually, but there's multiple theories of the resonance for consciousness that correspond most with the evidence. I mean, if you want to.
Sure. Well, I think I want to just give a quick comment. It's just like coming back to how confusing the subject is. We want to think about like resonance. What is resonating, right? Like when you're talking about everything being a wave, well, is there a substrate that's waving? Or is it just literally that reality itself is waving? Like, it's really hard. So biologically, what I think it is that resonance is this finite basis. Yeah, because I wanted to come to what Aiken Drum was saying. This experimental evidence suggests we have a limited set of things we think about. Yeah, we have a finite basis of patterns we can recognize, but an infinity of potential thoughts that we could potentially think, but we don't think because of entropy. We tend to saturate around the maximum entropy state and just sort of oscillate between a couple of thoughts that are the maximum entropy or minimum energy states. So what's resonating is you have these, like, to get to the next step, we have to go into the quantum chunking. So you have within the full quantum mind some things that look like basically the opposite of what the chunks that are coming in look like, so that they can recognize the chunks. And you only have a finite number of patterns that you can recognize. And these patterns have a quasi-biological, quasi-quantum mechanical explanation where energy starts to fill up in the sensor. You can think of it like a sensor. And then once it's triggered, you get a quantum state transition of a pure recognition, right? Because there's information that comes in before the pattern is recognized. And then we have the ability to recognize patterns which are on different levels of complexity. So we'll tend to discover patterns on levels of complexity that are different. We'll get information from the immediate environment, and then we'll get like all this meta information that exists on different levels. So there's another chunking for you.
Yeah, I put in the link my video where I actually spent a full 2.5 hours reading this long paper, and in the link to it, Science Direct from Stephen Grossberg, 2016, Towards Solving the Hard Problem of Consciousness, the Varieties of Brain Resonances and the Consciousness Experiences that they support. And even the 2.5 hours, I didn't even think I read the whole thing. It's a really long paper, but it looks at the various theories of resonance in the brain as a predictive machine and different things, but corresponding with the evidence that qualia of consciousness can be observed by different parts of the brain resonating at the same time into a greater experience. And then this is like JF and the testing and the greatest, all of the various scientific evidence that we know at a time, trying to put it together in like larger theory called adaptive resonance that somehow supports some sort of qualia of consciousness. And it's hypothetical. It's still largely theoretical. And this is 2017. So this is the current latest direction. And even theories of quantum mind and quantum consciousness usually also have some form of quantum adaptive resonance theory also, that that what forms the qualia, and it's going to be various factors resonating at the same frequency that brings it, so to say, to the stage of consciousness, where there's going to be one thing or a series of things that could occupy the current stage of consciousness, and those things that occupy the certain stage of consciousness on a mechanical level is because there's multiple sections of the brain that are vibrating at the same frequency. So mechanically, when something is brought to the forefront of my consciousness on a physical level, that's because various sections of my brain that correspond to that thought are vibrating at the same frequency, enough so that it enters my stage of consciousness at a meta higher level of abstraction. And I would argue that it's not arising from the brain like neural circuits, that it's arising from quantum effects and interplay between a separate non-material realm, so that the thought is not actually coming from the brain. Kind of actually, like Eki Lux said, the brain is a receptor towards the soul, to the projection of the soul or the spiritual realm, or however these things operate. But the effects that we see in the brain relate to those resonant theories, not because the thought process is occurring there, but because the brain is receiving a signal from some other place. Most likely in Doooovid's theory, this dualistic spiritual realm.
Cool. Well, thanks for going into that. Maybe we can.
I even prepared the debate. If me and Jennifer debated, I thought about multiple ways I was going to present that in the affirmative. And I guess Jennifer's perspective would have been that the direction of quantum mind can explain consciousness, perceptions of free will, even reincarnation, without the necessity of a dualistic, separate spiritual realm.
Well, my position is that this separate realm is like the Platonic form of the Platonic ideal shape realm, but it has like a multitude of shapes that are far more complex than just spheres, etc. And that it's useful. And it exists in a metaphysical sense, in a practical sense.
There's different forms of dualism also, where they say,
I don't know if that's dualistic or what it is.
There's different schools of dualism where you say there's absolute separation of physical and material, of spiritual and material, or you say that no, spiritual and material are both made up of the same God type substance and are different aspects of the same reality, which is also a form of dualism.
I would say
So
that the metaphysical is the cookie cutter and we're the cookies. Because the metaphysical is like the perfect sphere and we're like the manqué of the perfect sphere. I never put it into the language of dualism and non-dualism. Like, I'm not being cagey. I just really don't quite know how to situate it in the context.
well, because you're not conversant in the language of the sages, and even the reason why I'm using those words is
People mean different things when they say that, though. So there's also a definitional problem. Like when you say dualism, you're saying there's a separate spiritual realm that's inaccessible from this realm.
yeah, we might be able to, like Plato in the cave, we might be able to see the effects on this realm of it, but we can't actually access the spiritual from the material. We could just see its effects.
Is that kind of like the same cookie cutter and cookie metaphor? Because that's literally how I see it. It's like the universe is telling us spheres, and we're like quasi spheres because the only real spheres are uncollapsed quantum mechanical waveforms, which have a limited degree of consciousness that they can experience. Mark Smith wants to know who the sages are.
Okay, so we've been at it a while. I'm not sure. Do you want to just cut it short? Did you want to look at some slides on Hinduism and learn like terminology of Hindu theology in schools, or was there anything you wanted to discuss?
We could look at the Hinduism thing for a little bit. Did you send me the link for that?
No, I had to download them. I have on my computer, so you'd have to do a
Screen share?
screen share.
Yeah, if you want to, or we can just wrap it up and put it to next week. It's either way is good with me.
Maybe we're going to do the slides. Let's do them now because give a little educational content, and so it looks like the modern day debate things doesn't look like it's happening, but if somehow it does, that we could probably adapt quickly. So I said, even if like they emailed you tomorrow and said we're on for tonight, we could probably put on a good show. But we'll say as of now, it looks like they're sketchy and don't have their stuff together, and it's not going to be happening this week or maybe even ever.
It almost seems like they have a regular sort of cast that they're walking through.
Because they're making money. They have a system. You're saying they're just like an open venue for everybody. I mean, they have a system, and maybe they have a vetting process, or maybe they just don't have time. They backlog, and it's like, they're making money. They got their list. Do they really want to give someone new a chance? And you might not have paid to give someone new a chance.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens in the future. Maybe we can.
Or it could be like Kevin McDonald, where like literally like a year later he gets to me like my Twitter message. He's like, oh, I just saw it now. Like literally like a year later, it's like, I'm sorry, I just saw it now. Like I get a lot of messages. Like it wasn't a top priority of me to answer all the messages that random people sent me.
Well, at least he got back to you. That's good. Well, we can. I can try to email them again, or
welcome to Goldsmart.
I don't really know.
10 years ago, Goldsmart was founded to give customers an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to be like begging, like, please let me on your show, and okay, so.
Well, I think it was like a form letter that they sent, or like an automatic reply, so they may not have seen it either. So
it could have been a good path to grow your channel, and saying the real reason I thought to do it was to help you grow your channel, and I think that it helped like the show or advancing ideas to be behind a monetized channel. But end of the day, it's not that important. So can you see? Do you have me on screen share?
I'll pull it up. All right, should just be like 10 seconds and
okay, so you probably got to give me a full screen for this.
Yep.
Okay, so here's one on Vedanta. Itara Mimamsa, the later exegesis school, but it has a little precursor here of the various schools of Hinduism. So it's got Purva Mimamsa, the earlier exegesis school, Karmakanda, Uttara, which is just later. Jnana Kanda includes the Vedanta, the Upanishads, this later exegetical school. Moksha, through knowledge of Brahman, is the aim rather than following Vedic rituals. Just first putting out there that the earliest exegesis school was just karma kanda. This is the ritual. This is what you do if you want to change your karma. And then there's a later understanding that knowledge of Brahman is more important than actually correct prescribed following of the ritual, or at least just in terms of schools, whether there was historical development. But these are sampradayas. It's the Sanskrit for Vedantic schools. You have the Advaita Vedanta Shankaracharya, which we'll talk about more. It's the most famous. And here's some foundational scripture. We've talked about this many times. The Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, Bhagavad Gita. You got the Brahma Sutra, put in its final form about 500 CE. First systemization of the ideas in the Upanishads and summary of interpretations by many earlier authors, including Badarayana, who is traditionally regarded as the author. So the religious understanding, like what's the origin of these scripture? Did it come from God? But historically, the first compiled versions start appearing about 500 CD in written text. Short, cryptic thread of thought that can be interpreted in various and opposed ways. Coherence of the Upanishads teaching on Brahman, critique of non-Vedantic views, means of realizing Brahman, fruits of knowledge, death and destinies of souls. So the concept of reincarnation, transmigration of souls, very important in the Brahma Sutra. The self then travels by a ray of light on two paths, those with knowledge of Brahman on the northern path, the way of the gods, to the sun, the light of liberation. Those without knowledge on the southern path, the way of the fathers, to the moon and rebirth. So it's some sort of level of like free will entering, and not just a matter like karma is effectuated by proper performance of material rituals or chanting of mantras, but there's some sort of intention or understanding level. And the trajectory of a person's soul is determined by how well they understand these spiritual concepts. Subtle bodies the size of a grain of rice return to earth through the ether, smoke, mist, and clouds. So Badarayana rejects the Shankya dualism of Prakriti and Purusha, and makes consciousness and matter two modifications of Brahman. So Parinama, Brahman creates the universe by transforming into it. The self is part of Amsha of Brahman, not separate, but also not identical. Bida Abida Vada, different, non-different view. So this is the main juxt of what I want to get into, these various Vedic schools of dualism, explanations of reality. Are there two different realms of the soul and spirit and the material, or the interplay of this soul and spirit? And what are these various Vedantic, Vedic schools that have various different approaches? I'm not sure. Did you want to add some stuff, Jennifer?
Sure. So we've got, well, can you just, yeah, I'll just, whoa, I was reading off there and then my avatar popped up. Sorry about that. I'll just screen share it. Yeah, well, it kind of lines up a little bit with the idea that the universe is an electromassive quantum computer, and consciousness, as we experience it, is an electric quantum computer. So it's the same basic functioning, but a separate type of quantum computer that is self, which is like your basic building block of what we experience as subjective consciousness. So there's historically been a really hard time translating this stuff because of the measurement limit / the subjective problem / the hard problem of consciousness. So thank you for bringing this slideshow to our attention. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, so let's look here. They bring 7 or 8 different major subschools of Vedanta. And some of these will be well familiar, like Advaita, of non-duality, which Shankaracharya sometimes included, from the critique of Hare Krishnas, could be Mayavadi of saying like, no, we're dualists. So Mayavadi is the negative Advaita non-duality school that's been popularized by Shankaracharya. You have Beta Abeta, and Veta means dual, and so Advaita is just it means the negation, so it's non-dual literally by Sanskrit terminology, and also these other ones, the A in the beginning usually means non. So Beta from Bhaskara, difference, non-difference. So we'll see more what these mean. The Vishishta Advaita from Ramanuja, non-duality of the qualified, as Brahman is Vishnu. So there's like qualified dualism. Dvaita, so that's duality as opposed to Advaita, non-duality. And this is a Madhva, Brahman is Vishnu. The Hare Krishna school comes from this Dvaita. So you Dvaita Advaita from Nimbarka, and this is actually the Hare Krishna school. Dvaita Advaita, duality, non-duality. Nimbarka, Brahman is Krishna. And you have Shaiva Tantrism, Brahman is Shiva. And you have Shuddha Advaita, pure non-dualism. Also could Brahman is Krishna. And then the Lord Chaitanya, Achintya Beta, inconceivable difference in sameness, which is kind of this like dualism and non-dualism. So you basically you have dualism and non-dualism, but here you have 8 differentiations in Hindu schools between dualism and non-dualism. So let's start with Advaita Vedanta. Shankaracharya, Brahmin of Kerala, 8th century CE, one of the most famous people ever to come out of India. Brahma Sutra commentaries on the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutras. Gaurapada's Karikas with its Ajataveta no-birth doctrine influenced by Mahayana Buddhism. It's an example of temples under the influence of his teachings. So you have Advaita non-duality, radical monism, Atma is Brahman. All change in polarity is an appearance, an illusion produced by avidya, cognitive error. So it's kind of like a theory of cognitive dissonance. Saying there is only one duality, there is only one reality, everything is one, everything is God. Change in plurality is an illusion called avidya. Is this familiar to you, Jennifer?
It is. Unfortunately, Maharishi's quote there is logically inconsistent, but I think there is a way to put this in the language of cognitive dissonance.
Yes, I mean, this is all related. That's why I wanted to go over and even, get some of the terminology. And, I was going to prepare, I wasn't going to talk about this during our debate, but I did want to prepare like an understanding. I was probably going to put it more in Western terms. But show that almost all spiritual systems have this dualism, non-dualism, debates, just like Kabbalists and Jews and Hindus. Okay, so the Mahavakyas. So here is the Prajnanam Brahma, Brahma's consciousness, in the Upanishad where that comes from. Here's the Aham Brahma Asmi, the I am Brahman, Tat Tvam Asi, that you are, and Ayam Atma Brahman, this self is Brahma. And those could have slightly different implications. So here that's you have the Satchitananda Any Hindu has heard of these. This triad, Sat, which sometimes means like Satya could mean like truthfulness, but here usually like being, Sit. Here it is consciousness and Ananda. Sometimes they're translated differently, like eternal. But here, avidya, what we saw, the soul identifies itself with the finite body mind, forgetting it's really only the Atman. So there's a nature that there's a natural cognitive error of the soul to identify with the body, even though that's not the reality. And this is referred to as avidya. So Sankhya-acharya rejects Sankhya, Parinama, and Prakriti, at least from the ultimate point of view. So let's get a few more words here. Parinama is the real material transformation of Brahman into the world. Vivarta, creation is only apparent, effect is mere appearance. Like multiple truth hypothesis. Hinduism is very compatible with quantum mechanics and various fields of consciousness. Satyarya Vada of Shakya, effect pre-exists in the cause. That sometimes the nature of cause and effect could have complications, like here the Shaktarya Vada of Shakya, where effect pre-exists in the cause, and Saktarana Vada, only the cause exists.
Yeah, this sort of comes back to talking about, axioms and existence and reality, and how we define these things will impact the form the answers will take. So if we're looking at the last one, could you just go back one slide, please?
Which one are you looking for?
That one. Only the cause exists. Sat Karana Vada of Shankara, only the cause exists. So that would be a different definition on existence than what I'm using. So I'm using a more generous definition of existence, because I want to use the one that sort of like the for dummies definition. This is more of a having a look bird's eye view at all the different possible definitions. So thanks again for taking us through this.
Okay, so the Paramarthika says reality, Brahman, ultimate, pure, eternal, unchanging. The levels of being, so you have the ultimate, pure, eternal, unchanging. And the Vava Harika, the appearance, the phenomenal, empirical world, the self-object, duality, senses, ordinary persons, practical life appears real until Brahman is realized, and presumably its nature is changing. And the Pradabhashika illusion. So these, just different natures of dualism in the nature of schools of dualism. So there's something eternal, unchanging, and then there's this something changing. And what's the essence of what's unchanging, and what's the essence of what's capable of changing in these various elements that leads into actually the most complex forms of theories of consciousness probably known in the world today come from these schools of Hinduism, right?
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by complex. Like, from what I saw on a video put out by a guy who's doing videos on Ayurveda, was pretty good. He said that within the Indian sciences, they tend to focus more on the distinction between the self and the soul, whereas in Western, they more focus on the soul versus the body. So they're answering essentially different categories of questions. But in terms of the power of these approaches is that you have relatively fewer axioms and a simpler mechanics. You do have to, get past the hurdle. It's not exactly easy to learn this stuff, but it is fun to have a little intro. Why don't we keep going?
Okay, so epistemology, about halfway through. Adhyasa, superimposition, projection upon the substrate of Brahman of previous experiences and memories. So Varana, power veiling, and Vishekya of distortion, projection. Misidentification of the self with a phenomenal appearance. The self continues itself within its reflection. So
I mean, confuses.
So theory of limitations, Vacheda Vada. So upadi, limitations, karmatically determined conditions of body and mind that limit and distort cognition. When free of upadis, the self shines forth in its singularity. Projection separates where there is none, like the space in a pot is distinct from space. Anything you want to say on Vicheta-Vada theory of limitations? You want to call like the calculus, the boundary conditions?
Ooh, I like that. Well, eventually we're going to have to unify all this stuff. So get your creativity engines started.
Reflection theory, Pratimbimba reflection. The individual self is a reflection of the Atman, or the mirror of ignorance. The moon's reflection of the water seems to be separate and multiple. Your reflection as a mirror appears as you and separate. Is empirical reality is pure appearance, but is not you. And these type things are compatible with like multiverse or quantum mind models. So here's the psychophysical jiva, the jiva, the soul. So you have the gross physical body, the subtle body, the 5 sense organs, the 5 organs of action, the voice, hands, feet, excretory, and reproductive organs, vital breath, prana, intellect, buddhi, ida, ahamkara, sensory mind, manas. And those vital breath and like ego and sensory mind make up the antaharakarana. So Shankaracharya accepts the 6 pramanas of Mimamsa, but only 3 are important. There's testimony, perception, and inference. No valid means of knowing at the lower level, lower empirical level. The jiva is made of projections rather than material evolutes of prakriti. The jiva appears because of the failure to discriminate viveka, the real self, from its non-real appearance. All selves are identical to Atman, untouched by the apparently separate mind-body complexes. Anything, or just keep going?
Yeah, you can just keep going. I'm listening.
So Maya, the empirical world, like a magical, illusory, but exists. Maya is a anivravachniya, inexpressible. It cannot be said to be real or unreal. It is the totality of errors caused by avidya, which is the misperception of the body for being real as opposed to the soul. Shankaracharya insists that Maya does not entail subjective idealism. The 2 subschools of Advaita, Brahmati and Vivarana. So Brahmati, Madana Misra, some names. The self is the locus of ignorance, avidya. Brahman is untouched by Maya, plurality of jivas with their own ignorance. So the reason of ignorance is me. That essential problem of who is the me, my body or the soul, that is a fundamental paradoxical problem of avidya that creates Maya. But the true Brahman self is untouched by any of this Maya. And then you have plurality, kind of like every person has their own different Maya, their own avidya, because, a different trajectory of soul. So the Brahmati school of Advaita, then the Varana school, where Brahman is the locus of ignorance, and jivas are mere reflections of the Atman. So it's not that Brahman is untouched by Maya, but the ignorance is actually sourced within Brahman. So it resolves the contradiction by the 2 levels of truth. Shankaracharya, subject-object duality is real on the phenomenal level. It is sublated, badhya, or transcended as unreal on the ultimate level. We realize it to be an appearance within the one consciousness. So we see there, like the Lord Chaitanya one, to get these terminologies correct. So, already Shankaracharya looking at this, what's going on, like what's real, what's not real, and saying, so there's a contradiction at levels, where at one level it's real on the phenomenal level, but on the sublated ultimate level, it's not actually real. And that, it's kind of like the schools when I say, like, the material world doesn't actually exist. So on the phenomenological level of, like, quantum physics and the reduction state of yes, like in the reduced level, Schrodinger's cat, there is a material reality on a phenomenological level. But on the true level of what's actually reality is then like, no, that doesn't even exist. Ultimately, like, no, that's not real.
Yeah, again, and you gotta basically commit to a definition of reality. I'm not saying right this second, but it's always going to be relative, right? So you've got schools in here that are defining the only things that are real are metaphysical, i.e., like purely causes. There's very few things that are purely a cause. So you get formalism, like the bodies, which is what you have up right now, as well as the elements, so forth. Gunas, go ahead.
Yeah, and saying, life is largely a learning experience. So you would say if good enough karma to be a teacher, but most teachers still spend the majority of time learning. So 5 koshas of self. So you have the body, life, energy, mind, awareness, and bliss. You have the self's 4 levels of consciousness related to the Om sound vibrational mantra of A, waking, Jagrita, and U, dreaming, Swapna, M, deep sleep, Shushupti, and the Om mantra together, transcendental consciousness, Turiya. So what is God? So Nirguna Brahman, the higher impersonal absolute, kind of like a Jehovah type, that there's this impersonal, pure higher level of God. Saguna Brahman, the empirical appearance, that something that could be deciphered, through cause and effect. So Ishvara, personal Lord, creator God on the level of appearance in Maya. So that God will even appear within Maya in Ishvara, personal form, even in the pure level of Maya, that there is a personal form of God that appears, like a Narayana Vasudeva. Liberation. So Jivan Mukti usually liberation. Jivan is the ultimate soul identity that we are. So Jivan Mukti, the liberation of the soul. So Paramdra karma and process of manifesting that cannot be avoided. Something that's saying, this is my karma, it like fated, that it was predetermined when my soul took birth, or whatever cause and effect practices that can't be avoided. Samskara, latent impression from past lives. Vasana, habit energy. Samnyasa, renunciation. Upasanya, worship of the Saguna deity. Imagery worship, puja. Nidhyasana, sustained contemplation of the Supreme Self by sannyasis, meditation on like the Om mantra. Any comments on that, Jennifer? You want to go on to the Vihishadvaita Vedanta?
Yeah, let's just keep going.
Okay, we're almost done. So cool picture here. The Vishish Vishitatvaita. So this is the Ramanuja
plus Dvaita. Dvaita means non-dual. Sorry, it means dual.
That's what I was trying to say. It's Vishit Advaita. It's not Vishita, or is the A go for both? So it's a Vishita Advaita, and they just use the same A. That's why I've had a hard time pronouncing.
Isn't it Vashista?
I'm not sure, actually. I'm not familiar with that term, so hope you're right.
Oh yeah, Bhashya, he was really based. Strongly criticized Advaita. Are you familiar with any of these criticisms against Advaita?
Well, some of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I just wanted to lay out the
Maya body. It's basically the Maya body criticism.
Yes, I wanted to lay out the schools so people get too caught up in the arguments between schools, just to feel feel for some of these larger arguments, or reason why we have schools, because there's complexity of a tree. Commentary of the Brahma Sutra criticizes Advaita, rejected the idea of Nirguna Brahman Brahman is not impersonal absolute. Brahman has personal qualities, saguna. Ramanuja rejected Maya. The world is not an unreal illusion, a Buddhist idea that diminishes God's creativity, power, and grace. Vishnu is Brahman and the supreme soul. The world is his body. Brahman is the soul of the world, just as we inhabit our bodies. So it's kind of like God with a soul and body, and this world is like the body of God. So say that again, the Visista Advaita?
Vishista Advaita.
Vishista Advaita, qualified non-duality, the non-duality of that which is qualified. The self is non-different from Brahman, but persons and material things are qualities of Brahman, like the color red is a quality of a rose, distinguishable from it, but still interfused with its being. So Vishita means distinguishable. So, or here the translation is qualified non-duality of things, distinguishable non-duality. Individual selves are modes, prakara of Brahman. Brahman is fully present in each part, but transcends them all. The best way to know Brahman is the path of devotion, bhakti, and the path of action, karma, rather than the Advaita path of knowledge, jnana. Upasana, devotional contemplation of the Supreme Lord. Prapati, liberation, is attained by self-surrender to God's grace. Ramanuja was a Sri Vaishnava and combines Vaishnava theology and popular worship of Vishnu with Vedanta. The Lord is Saguna. Brahman undergoes a real transformation of his body, not an illusory one. Brahma Shariya Paranama, from the subtle to the gross level of manifestation of individual souls in the inanimate material world. His purity and transcendence are untouched by creation. Thus, Ramanuja rejects Shankaracharya's Shatkarana, but accepts Satkaryavada. In the interludes between world creations and destructions, Pralaya, the cyclic dissolution of the universe, souls and the cosmos rest latently in Vishnu, the subtle form. And before I finish this up, the last few slides, just to mention on this Ramanuja school, where you could kind of look at that in terms of like Trinitarianism in Christianity, where it's saying that everything is one, and it's just a differentiated understanding in like, you know, Christ in the material form of the Father is the same as the Son. So it's not the same thing from Ramanujacharya, but generally Shankaracharya is seen to imply that deity worship is not necessary anymore. But Ramanujacharya is saying deity worship is still the proper form, and so to say that the deity is real, it is not just symbolic, and does represent some specialized energy, you know, of or actual form, personal form of the true nature of the God. That the true nature is not impersonal. I don't know if you have any comment on that before I finish these up.
Nope. Go ahead, finish up. I'll quickly share a slide or two after this.
Okay, so Brahman is only Saguna, Ishvara, the Lord, Vishnu, and his avatars. So Dvaita Vedanta, so Madhava, 13th century radical dualism, rejects Advaita monism. Advaitins are deceitful demons, uncompromising monotheistic conception of God. God created the universe, Jagat, made of Prakriti and souls. No pranama, no vivarta, no maya. God is the efficient, not the material cause of the world. Selves in the world are fully real, not an illusion. Souls are eternal but separate and dependent upon God's grace for their existence and salvation. Souls are plural, and God determines their destinies. The self is not absorbed in Brahman. Tattvam Asi is not an assertion of identity, but of similarity of qualities. Worship is the path to God, eternal damnation for the wicked. There's Sri Harsha, 12th century Advaita, Suites of Refutation. So I'm not going to try to pronounce that one. Contest between Jnana and Vedanta is the fundamental philosophy of Hinduism. Vedanta wins. Potter's bhakticized Advaita leap philosophy, demolishes all the concepts of Vimasa Buddhism and especially of Nyaya Vaishika. So counterattack on Nyaya Vaishika, no pranamas are valid, all categories are indefinable and so unreal. Being, causes, relation, universals, time, space, numbers, and qualities are all self-contradictory. God's existence cannot be proved. Perceptual realism is indemonstrable, kind of like Gödel's incompleteness theorem. In the last slide, all conceptual discrimination falls into vicious infinite regress and is refuted lock, stock, and barrel. Adoption of Nagarjuna's Prasangika method of negative logic to prove a positive thesis. Self-luminous Brahman is only intelligible, non-contradictory reality. Counterattack of New Nyaya and Gagnatia. Technical refinement in analogic to make it immune to attack. Rigorous logical formulas similar to logical positivism of the 20th century. So that's all of these slides, but it was pretty interesting. Unfortunately, didn't have extra slides to go into the Hare Krishna school of Achitya Beta Veda, inconceivable difference and sameness, but it's a further kind of dichotomy of what's the true nature of dualism, or is it the qualified dualism, where it's saying there's one reality with two one eternal truth with two forms of expression of that in material of dualism, or that there's two separate natures, and then defining these natures and all the fine implications that these various philosophical schools have. And the debates are actually better in Hinduism than in the West. So if you're looking for more scholarly, kind of like all these various schools and possibilities in schools based on the various possibilities, probably Hinduism is a better example to use than like Kabbalistic schools or Christian schools. Well, I mean, Kabbalistic school, there's a lot too.
I was just pulling up my model here.
Maya? You were just pulling up Maya, even though it doesn't exist?
Yes.
Or is that like a Canadian Maya? Or was it that was a Sanskrit Maya, or was that a Canadian Maya?
Oh, I'm not too sure, Ray. Been traveling so long, don't know where home is anymore. Yeah, so as you guys can see, I maybe got a little bit of an impression that some of these debates, as you can imagine, might get pretty tedious. And, far be it for me to intervene if people want to debate tedious things, but I at least want to give one model that is going to line up with science, because I don't want to have to debate whether the approach is good, nor do I want to have to debate which approach I have to take based on all these schools. So yeah, I've got my fountain model, and the body is kind of the fountain, the physical fountain. The shape of the water, that's what the ego, and then the water itself is the self. So to actually get from ego to self is very hard. Most people can get from body to mind, though. So enjoy. That's all I really want to add. But yeah, it's certainly a fascinating field, and I really appreciate you bringing that. Very interesting. Very interesting slideshow indeed. Makes me feel all nostalgic. Wouldn't it be fun to just geek out with actual experts on this stuff rather than LARPers? Because God, it would be so good.
Okay, so is that
be able to beat me, really? I mean, before we go, I still wanted to talk about what happened with you on Luke's, and also Luke apparently said something about Claire, and Claire was talking about it on her show. But I neither saw the show nor did Claire say what happened, which means it's something funny. So, and you told me about it too, so I wanted you to maybe retell me just a little bit.
probably Ashley Bravo? I'm not sure. Someone in Luke's chat asked him to play part of Claire's stream, so I'm not sure if Claire was directly responding to Luke or bashing him. So Luke kind of gets into the this e-personality of Claire. One he seems to be was mentioning that she probably has like a private source of income, and just her whole kind of logic on streaming or what people should or shouldn't do is kind of off, and why she's not getting the results she's seeking. So Luke had pretty good critique on Claire, nothing new, similar critique he's given before. I think it was largely just caused by someone in his chat asking him to play a clip. So I'm not sure if there's anything more than
And what
that.
was
Like
on the clip?
it was Claire critiquing Judaism and religion with
Oh.
her kind of like secular Quranism or Christianity's kaput type thing, and maybe he was supposed to play something, but Luke couldn't find like the point in the video, or was just playing things and then gave up after a few minutes.
Why, that doesn't sound like Luke at all. And also, you said you went on a show or just for a bit?
Was it Friday? I was on a show, and Tuesday. I think I was definitely on a show Friday, and maybe I was on a show another day this week, and we just talked a little bit, kind of about. I talked a little bit about like Trump or politics, but just kind of telling him like, can't wait till he gets more interested in talking about Torah and Jewish theology again, and so it was pretty short.
Oh no. All right. Well, we'll keep a finger on the pulse of whether Luke has any quantum phase transitions in the near future. But yeah, if you want to wrap it up now, if we've gone over everything, Howie was a little sad in the chat. The thing with Doovid is you got to sort of go. Well, I think this works for with everybody. It's like it's down to intentions, Try to read the intention. Less so than.
Well, it's like to be brief,
words.
I think it's how I didn't really want to ramble on or like hear his thoughts and opinions on every single issue. I want like week in review. He's got to like put it together, give a little, because like I'm a, I guess a results action oriented, organized. So I lose patience just with someone like like let me tell you like a series of my random thoughts on a whole bunch of issues, without clearly kind of like expressing where they're going, why they're bothering with it. And maybe it's hard for the purpose of the show to say that, well that's kind of like what I feel like you do, so I'm just doing what you do. But that's what it's good to be your own boss. It's good to have your own show.
Yeah, well, it's like communication, right? Like, I totally get it that you don't want to have to be teaching. I don't mind teaching, but I do get you an issue like when someone's like literally insulting me while I'm teaching. It's like, if you want my teachings, Howie, you gotta be polite, right?
But it's just stupidity that comes for. I mean, if you do spiritual things where it's like let me. I asked a good question, and now you could spend like 10 minutes explaining it. That just feeds off the ego. That it's my ego. The ego. Oh, you asked a question, and now I get to spend 10 minutes explaining an answer. And and just the ego to like this week in review. Like I'm not here to like answer like it's not like a Q&A where it's like whatever. So I'm saying like I encourage those type things, but just the terms like I want to make week in review for people who take streaming seriously. And if your point is like I don't take streaming seriously, then then you're not going to be a long-term good guest for a week in review. I mean, you could be in the chat, you could be part of it.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a struggle because we do like that people have ideas. It's just that you can introduce your idea, but it's like nobody owes you giving a shit about your ideas, and a lot of people maybe they think that they're sort of in this state of mistaken identity almost. It's like they think because they watch shows about debates that they're good at debates now.
It'd be like needy or something where it's like, oh, these losers, they can't find anyone to talk to, so like I'll talk to them. And so it's tough putting together a show, and even like Jennifer, that's what I encourage her to step up her game a little bit, and even that monetary factor to come in, saying like, yeah, mainstream people usually need money, like they have families and bills, and money is a huge factor in why people do things. So if you have a venue that is profitable to them according to their own terms, that's when it's likely that you expand your networks, because it's profitable to people to join your networks according to their own terms. You don't need to convince them of your own terms. So it's like, oh, will you come on my program? And it's saying like, yeah, they're probably gonna get so many books, sell so many books, so many viewers or something. So from their own terms, the value proposition is very clear. So when you don't really have a good value proposition, you usually avoid it, because it's like, oh man, what if someone brings up a value proposition, realizes that you basically, I'm just wasting their time. And so it's usually indicative to some, heuristic. If people avoid the value propositions because there is none. And if there is a value proposition, it's usually very easy to work out. So when you have a good successful show going, like booking and getting guests isn't problematic. So hence the the creation of a good successful show, is worth the effort.
Yeah, I'm sure if you want to have like an informal debate on your channel with me, I'm sure that would get some super chats.
Yeah, I don't know if it's worth. I mean, the main reason I wanted to do the debate was, long-term profitability is a goal of mine, but it's like, even if we're gonna make like $50, $100, or even $200, like I don't know if I'd do it just for the money, but I wanted to do it in conjunction to give us more likelihood that we could get into circles with people participating in the Science of Consciousness conference. And as of now, it doesn't look that likely, because like I don't see any like internet circles being created around the Science of Consciousness conference. It looks like they're just going to like do a Zoom meeting and then post it later, and there's absolutely no like discussions or anything like going on. Maybe I'm wrong, and we'll find out this week. So that was why I was pushing to do it this week. After that, like it's still important or good to do, but I'm probably more likely just to go forward with more of my research on multiple truth hypothesis or chess or various things. Ask the rabbis and put it out there, and we'll have to think long term. And I think getting your channel monetized is more important because we do the stream on your channel each week, and also in terms of getting people interested in these circles that people want to take part in a successful venture. And it's pretty easy to see success in a certain realm, like saying the money is karma. How do you know if a person has a successful venture? And saying, well, there's things that are clear indications, like money, like getting paid, like numbers, like stats, like notable reputation, networking type things. So those are the type things that I would like the show to have. We're saying like, and not because we're not doing it for any of those reasons, but an affiliated attribute of the show is that's profitable. It expands people's networks. It creates all this added value.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up for now. And thanks everyone for coming by. And we'll talk to you next Sunday, if not sooner. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before I wrap it up?
Yeah, just to mention that if for some reason modern day debate does get back and they're like, like it could happen, right away, I think we should do it. And, so anyone who's watching, curious about that, like if they do set out a day, like, we'll book it and tweet it right away. But if they say next week, maybe we'll do it next week. But so it is remotely possible that somehow like we will get a reply to one of these messages, and then they'll want to book it right away. And if that does happen, we'll message that out.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, and thanks to the audience for participating. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll talk to you again next Sunday, if not sooner.
Yeah, that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up
and fuck your goddamn logic.
They control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing a Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with a retard?